Billionaire CEO mocks Gardner. What he reveals about the company leaves everyone shocked. Thomas Johnson was trembling as he held the yellow documents in his calloused hands. The 52-year-old Gardner knew those papers could change everything, but he also knew no one would believe him, especially not after what had happened the previous morning, when the CEO of Pinnacle Construction, Richard Bennett Jr., had humiliated him in front of all the employees in the company garden. The words still echoed in his mind like knife wounds. "You're just an illiterate gardener. Tend to your plants and leave business to those who understand." Thomas took a deep breath as he watched the morning bustle at the company where he'd worked for 23 years. Employees rushed in, executives stepped out of luxury cars, secretaries hurried with stacks of documents. No one paid attention to the man in green overalls watering the rose bushes near the executive parking lot. But Thomas noticed everything. Over 2 decades of walking the halls, gardens, and offices of Pinnacle Construction, he'd seen things he shouldn't have, heard conversations not meant for his ears, and now he held in his hands proof that New York City's most respected company hid secrets that could topple empires. "Thomas," shouted Michael, the maintenance supervisor, "Mr. Richard wants to see you now." The gardener's stomach twisted. He quickly tucked the documents into the inner pocket of his overalls and followed Michael through the marble corridors he knew by heart. His rubber boots squeaked against the polished floors, a stark contrast to the elegant silence of the surroundings. Richard Bennett Jr. was in his office on the top floor, a glass tower overlooking the entire city. At 58, the CEO was an imposing man with perfectly combed salt and pepper hair and an Italian suit worth more than Thomas made in a year. "Sit down," Richard ordered without looking up from the papers on his mahogany desk. Thomas remained standing, clutching his fabric hat in his hands. 23 years of work didn't even earn him a chair in the boss's office. "Sir, about yesterday," Thomas began but was cut off. "Forget about yesterday. I'm giving you one last chance, Johnson." Richard finally raised his eyes, and Thomas saw the same disdain as always. "You've been asking too many questions, snooping where you don't belong. Security told me you were poking around the offices after hours." "I was just doing my job, sir. The plants in the hallway needed—" "Plants?" Richard laughed sarcastically. "Do you really think I'm stupid, Johnson? 23 years here, and you've never been curious about what happens upstairs?" Thomas's heart raced. The documents in his pocket suddenly felt like they weighed a ton. "I don't know what you're talking about." Richard stood slowly, circling the desk with measured steps. He was taller than Thomas and used that advantage to intimidate. "Look at me when I'm talking to you." His voice was low, threatening. "You're a gardener, Johnson, a simple man who tends to plants. Your job here is to water, prune, and stay quiet. Very quiet." "Yes, sir." "Because if I find out you've been spreading rumors, making up stories about this company—" Richard paused, letting the threat hang in the air. "Well, it'd be a shame for you to lose your job after all this time, wouldn't it?" Thomas swallowed hard. He had a daughter in college, Emily, 22, studying business administration. His salary paid her tuition, their rented home, and barely left enough to help his widowed sister, Aunt Susan, who was raising 2 grandchildren alone. "I understand, sir." "Good." Richard returned to his desk. "Now get out of my sight. And remember, Johnson, people like you should know their place in the world." Thomas left the room with trembling legs and a face burning with humiliation. Alone in the elevator, he pulled the documents from his pocket and looked at them again. They were contracts, spreadsheets, handwritten notes, all found by chance in the finance department's trash 3 days ago when he was replacing the hallway plants. Normally, Thomas wouldn't pay attention to discarded papers, but something had caught his eye. Enormous numbers, names he recognized from TV, politicians, businessmen, and most of all, a pattern his simple but observant mind had managed to spot. Pinnacle Construction was involved in something much bigger and dirtier than he'd imagined. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps those of us just starting out. Now back to the story. When he reached the garden, Thomas found Mrs. Dorothy, the 62-year-old cleaner who'd worked at the company almost as long as he had. She was mechanically wiping the reception windows, but he noticed her hands, shaking slightly. "Mrs. Dorothy, are you all right?" The woman glanced around nervously before stepping closer. "Thomas, we need to talk, but not here." Her voice was a whisper. "Meet me in the cleaning supply closet at lunch. It's urgent. Did something happen? I can't talk now. They're watching everyone after what happened to you yesterday." A chill ran down Thomas's spine. For the rest of the morning, he worked on autopilot, trimming rose bushes, watering flower beds, but his mind was elsewhere. The documents burned in his pocket like hot coals. When the company bell rang at noon, Thomas discreetly made his way to the supply closet. Mrs. Dorothy was already there, sitting on an upturned bucket, her face pale and hands clasped. "Thomas, I know you found something," she said as soon as he closed the door. "And I know why you're scared." "Mrs. Dorothy, let me finish." She raised a hand. "I've worked at this company for 28 years. I clean offices, empty trash cans, wipe down rooms locked with 7 keys. And all these years I've seen things, many things." Thomas stepped closer, sensing he was about to learn he wasn't the only one who suspected something was wrong. What kind of things? Meetings in the dead of night, important men slipping in through back doors, money being counted in empty rooms. Mrs. Dorothy paused, and Thomas saw tears forming in her eyes. And people who asked too many questions and suddenly disappeared. Disappeared? How? They'd get fired, transferred, or just vanish. Like George from the storeroom. One day he was here, the next he'd quit. But I'd known George for 15 years. He'd never quit. He needed this job too badly. Thomas's stomach twisted. He thought of Emily, his sister, their rented house, the bills piling up every month. "Mrs. Dorothy, I found some papers." The cleaner's eyes widened. "Show me." With shaky hands, Thomas pulled out the documents. Mrs. Dorothy examined them for several minutes, flipping pages, pointing at numbers, whispering names she recognized. "Good Lord," she murmured finally. "Thomas, do you know what this means?" "I know these are huge numbers. I know there are names of important people, but I don't really understand business. These are inflated invoices." Mrs. Dorothy tapped a spreadsheet. "Look here. The municipal hospital project, budget submitted, 2 million. Actual cost, 800,000. Where did the difference go?" Thomas felt the world spin. He was starting to grasp the gravity of what he held in his hands. "And this one," she continued, pointing to another document. "The school in Crocodile Heights, budget 3 million. But I know the contractor who worked on that project, my buddy Anthony. He told me he only got 1,200,000. So they're stealing. Not just stealing, Thomas, they're stealing public money. Money that should go to hospitals, schools, daycares. Money that would help people like us." At that moment, Thomas felt a rage he had never experienced before. He thought of the times he took Emily to the public hospital and had to wait hours for care. He thought of his nephew's school, where basic supplies were missing. He thought of how many families could have been helped with the money being diverted. "What do we do now?" he asked. "I don't know, Thomas, but I know if they find out you have this." Mrs. Dorothy didn't finish the sentence, but her look said it all. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made them both fall silent immediately. Thomas quickly hid the documents, and Mrs. Dorothy pretended to organize cleaning supplies. The door opened and Michael, the supervisor, appeared. "Thomas, Mr. Richard wants you in his office, immediately." The gardener felt his legs go weak. He exchanged a quick glance with Mrs. Dorothy, who gave a subtle nod as if to say, "Be careful." 15 minutes later, Thomas stood before the CEO again, but this time he wasn't alone. Next to Richard was a man he didn't recognize, thin, in a dark suit, with an icy stare. "Johnson, this is Dr. William Parker, our lawyer." Richard said, smiling, though the smile held no warmth. "He'd like to ask you a few questions." "Mr. Johnson," the lawyer said firmly, "we've been made aware that you may be in possession of documents belonging to this company." Thomas felt sweat trickle down his back. "I don't know what you're talking about." "No." William opened a folder and pulled out some photos. "These were taken by security cameras. You 3 days ago collecting papers from the finance department's trash." The photos clearly showed Thomas taking the documents. There was no denying it. I was just cleaning. Liar. Richard slammed his fist on the table. You were stealing confidential documents from my company. It's not stealing if it was in the trash, Thomas shot back without thinking. The silence that followed was deafening. Richard and the lawyer exchanged meaningful glances. Interesting, William said, jotting notes on a pad. So you admit you took the documents? Thomas realized he'd walked into a trap. His heart pounded so loudly he was sure the others could hear it. He stammered. Johnson, I'll be clear with you, Richard said, standing and walking to the window, his back to Thomas. You have two options. First, hand over the documents now, sign a confidentiality agreement, and keep working here as if nothing happened. And the second. Richard turned slowly, and Thomas saw a coldness in his eyes that terrified him. The second is I sue you for theft, corporate espionage, and defamation. You lose your job, your reputation is ruined, and you'll never work in New York City again. Your daughter drops out of college. Your family suffers. Thomas felt his world collapse. 23 years of honest work, and now he was being blackmailed for doing the right thing. What if I don't have the documents? Oh, but you do, William said with a cold smile, and we know exactly where they are. The lawyer signaled, and two security guards entered the room. Thomas recognized them. They were new hires, brought in just weeks ago. Big, intimidating men. Search him, Richard ordered. Hey, you can't... Thomas tried to protest, but one of the security guards held him firmly while the other searched his pockets. Within seconds, the documents were in Richard's hands, who examined them with satisfaction. Perfect. He tossed the papers onto the table. Now, Johnson, you're going to sign this document declaring you made it all up, that you tried to damage the company's reputation, and that you publicly retract your statements. Thomas looked at the paper William was handing him. It was a false confession, admitting he had forged the documents to extort money from the company. I won't sign this. No? Richard laughed. Then we'll go with the second option. The CEO picked up the phone and dialed a number. Captain Thompson, this is Richard Bennett Jr. Yes, that favor you owe me. I need you to come arrest an employee for attempted extortion. Thomas felt the ground give way beneath him. He thought of Emily, who was at the university at that moment, unaware her life was about to change forever. He thought of his widowed sister who relied on his help every month. He thought of his nephews, the plants he cared for so tenderly, the 23 years he'd dedicated to that company. Wait, Thomas said, his voice barely a whisper. Richard smiled victoriously. Changed your mind? Thomas looked at the documents on the table, the false confession in his hands, the smug faces of Richard and William. He felt a mix of anger, despair, and above all, a deep sadness at discovering the world was far crueler than he'd imagined. But then he remembered Mrs. Dorothy's words. Money that should have gone to hospitals, schools, daycares. Money that would help people like us. I won't sign, he repeated, this time firmly. Richard's expression darkened completely. You don't know who you're dealing with, Johnson. I can ruin your life with one call. Then ruin it. Thomas straightened his shoulders. But I won't sign a lie. What happened next would change everything. Richard grabbed his phone and dialed another number. Emily Johnson studies business at St. Mark's University, isn't that right? He asked while waiting for someone to answer. Thomas's blood ran cold. They knew about his daughter. Leave my family out of this. Hello, Dean Matthews. This is Richard Bennett Jr. from Pinnacle Construction. Yes, the one who donated. To the new library. Richard spoke while staring directly at Thomas. I have some information about one of your students, Emily Johnson. It seems she's involved in illegal activities. Stop, Thomas shouted. My daughter has nothing to do with this. Oh, she does. Richard covered the phone. She's the daughter of a thief. That tarnishes the university's reputation. Thomas felt tears burning his eyes. 22 years of work to pay for Emily's education, and now it was all about to be destroyed because of his conscience. What do you want? You sign the confession, resign for personal reasons, and your daughter keeps studying. Simple as that. Thomas picked up the pen with a trembling hand. He was about to sign when the office door swung open without warning. A woman around 60 years old stormed in like a hurricane. She was elegant, well-dressed, with neatly styled grey hair and eyes blazing with determination. Thomas recognized her immediately. It was Mrs. Helen Bennett, Richard's mother and co-founder of the company, alongside her late husband. "What's going on here?" she asked, looking at Thomas with the pen in his hand, the security guards, the lawyer, and her son. "Mom, this isn't your concern." Richard tried to sound firm, but Thomas detected nervousness in his voice. "Not my concern," Mrs. Helen laughed bitterly. "This company bears my name, young man. Everything that happens here is my concern." She walked over to Thomas and, to everyone's surprise, held out her hand to him. "Stand up, sir. No one signs anything standing in my presence." Thomas obeyed, confused. Mrs. Helen took the confession from his hands and read it quickly. "Richard, what is this?" "An employee trying to extort the company, Mother. Nothing serious." "Nothing serious?" Mrs. Helen looked at the papers scattered on the table. "And these documents, forged papers, the gardener is trying to—" "Richard," her voice cut through the air like a blade. "I founded this company 40 years ago. I know every number, every contract, every document that passes through here, and these papers are not forged." The silence in the room was absolute. Thomas saw Richard turn pale. "Mother, shut your mouth." Mrs. Helen continued examining the documents. "Northside Hospital, overbilled by $1,200,000. Crocodile Heights School, overbilled by $1,800,000. Newtown Daycare, overbilled by $900,000. Every number she read was like a punch to Richard's gut. "Sir," she addressed Thomas, "what is your name?" "Thomas Johnson, ma'am." "Mr. Thomas, how long have you worked here?" 23 years, ma'am." "And where did you find these documents?" Thomas glanced nervously at Richard, who was subtly signaling him not to answer. In the trash." "From the finance department, ma'am." Mrs. Helen turned to her son, and Thomas saw deep disappointment in her eyes. "Richard, do you know what your father would say if he were alive?" "Mother, let me explain." "There's nothing to explain." She slapped the documents on the table. "For 40 years, your father and I built this company with honesty, hard work, and respect. Never ever did we steal a single penny of public money. Times have changed, Mother. Everyone does it. If we don't, others will." "Others?" Mrs. Helen laughed bitterly. "You're talking about corruption as if it were a business. Strategy." Thomas watched the argument in silence, unsure whether to leave or stay. The security guards and the lawyer also seemed uncomfortable. "Mother, you don't understand how business works these days." "I don't understand?" Mrs. Helen stepped closer to her son, and though she was shorter, her presence was commanding. "I understand perfectly, Richard. I understand that you've turned the company your father and I built into a machine for stealing money from those who need it most. I multiplied the profits. The company has never made so much money. Made or stole?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Richard looked at the lawyer, who discreetly signaled for him to stop talking. "Mr. Thomas," Mrs. Helen addressed the gardener again, "do you have a family?" "Yes, ma'am. A daughter in college, and a widowed sister with 2 children." "And what did you intend to do with these documents?" Thomas thought about the question. Honestly, he didn't know what he'd planned to do. He'd found the papers by chance, kept them out of instinct, and only later began to grasp the gravity of what he held. "Sir, I don't know, ma'am. I just knew it was wrong, that people were struggling while this money was being stolen." Mrs. Helen nodded slowly. "Richard, dismiss the security and Dr. William. I want to speak with Mr. Thomas alone." "Mother, that's not wise." "Now!" The authority in her voice was undeniable. Richard motioned for everyone to leave. When the door closed, Mrs. Helen sat in one of the armchairs and gestured for Thomas to do the same. "Mr. Thomas, how old are you?" 52, ma'am." "And how long have you worked as a gardener?" "Since I was 20, ma'am. I've always liked plants, watching things grow." "What grade did you complete in school?" Thomas felt ashamed but answered honestly. "4th grade, ma'am. I had to leave school to help my mother." "And yet, you managed to spot irregularities in complex financial documents. How?" I may not have studied much, but I know how to do math, and I know when the numbers don't add up." Mrs. Helen smiled for the first time since entering the room. Do you know what impresses me the most, Mr. Thomas? You had the chance to ask for money to keep quiet, to blackmail my son, to take advantage of the situation, but you did none of that. That would have been wrong, Ma'am. It would have. And that's exactly why I'm going to make you an offer. Thomas widened his eyes. What kind of offer? I want you to help me clean up this company. Show me everything you've seen, everything you've heard, everything you suspect, and in return I'll make sure your daughter finishes college. And that you have a decent job for the rest of your life. Ma'am, I'm just a gardener. No, Mr. Thomas, you're an honest man, and honesty is the rarest quality in the business world. Thomas felt a strange emotion swelling in his chest. For the first time in 3 days, he saw a glimmer of hope. But what about your son and the company? My son committed serious crimes. The company can survive without corruption. It did for 40 years. Mrs. Helen paused. But I need someone who knows every corner of this place, who knows where to look, who people trust. People trust me? Mr. Thomas, you've worked here for 23 years. You know the janitors, the security guards, the receptionists. These are the people who see and hear everything. And I bet they trust you more than any executive. Thomas thought of Mrs. Dorothy, of George who had quit, of all the humble employees who had passed through the company over the years. What do you want me to do? Talk to these people. Find out what else they've seen, what else they know. I want to map out all the corruption, everyone involved, every scheme. And then we'll hand everything over to the proper authorities. We'll clean up this company and return the stolen money to where it belongs. Thomas felt a mix of hope and terror. It was a chance to make a difference, but also a huge risk. What if I say no? Then you go back to your garden. I'll pretend this conversation never happened, and you'll spend the rest of your life knowing you had the chance to change things, but lacked the courage. The challenge hit Thomas hard. He thought of Emily, studying business to have a better life than his. He thought of his nephews, who deserved schools with proper facilities. He thought of all the under-equipped hospitals, the shoddy construction projects, all the people hurt by the greed of a few. I'll do it, he said, surprising himself with the firmness in his voice. Mrs. Helen smiled and extended her hand. Then we have a deal, Mr. Thomas. But you should know, it'll be dangerous. My son won't give up easily, and he has powerful friends. I know, ma'am, but I can't pretend I didn't see anything anymore. At that moment, the door opened, and Richard walked in without knocking. Finished your little chat? He asked sarcastically. We are, Mrs. Helen said, standing. And we've made some decisions. What decisions? First decision, Mr. Thomas is being promoted. Starting tomorrow, he'll be the general maintenance supervisor. Richard burst out laughing. Mom, are you losing it? A gardener as a supervisor? Second decision, you're taking a leave of absence. A long one. Richard's smile vanished. What do you mean? 2 months away from the company. It'll do you good to reflect on your mistakes? Mom, I'm the CEO. I can't just leave now. Yes, you can. I'm still the board chair and majority shareholder, and I'm ordering your forced leave. Richard glared at Thomas with pure hatred. This is because of him? Because of a gardener? This is about the truth, Richard. Something you've forgotten. Thomas watched the family argument, unsure where to step in. It was clear he'd just placed himself at the center of a war that was only beginning. Mom, you can't do this. I have rights. You have the right to a lawyer when you're arrested. Mrs. Helen cut him off. Because that's where we're headed if you don't cooperate. You wouldn't have the courage to turn in your own son. I would, to save the company. And your father's memory, I absolutely would. The silence that followed was tense. Richard looked at his mother as if seeing her for the first time. Fine, he finally said. I'll take the leave, but when I come back, we'll settle this. He stormed out, slamming the door. Mrs. Helen sighed and sank into her chair. Mr. Thomas, I think we've just declared war. Are you sure you want to do this? He's your son. He is my son, but he's wrong. And when someone we love is wrong, our duty is to help them fix it, not pretend it isn't happening. Thomas nodded. He was starting to understand why this woman had built such a respected company. What do we do now? Now you go home. Talk to your daughter. Explain the situation. Tomorrow, The real work begins. What if she doesn't believe? Me? What if she thinks I'm making it all up? Mr. Thomas, your daughter studies business administration. She'll understand the importance of what we're doing. Thomas left the office that afternoon with mixed feelings. On one hand, he felt valued for the first time in 23 years. On the other, he knew he'd gotten himself into something much bigger than he'd imagined. The bus home was packed, as always in the evening rush. Thomas gripped an overhead rail and studied the tired faces of workers around him. Ordinary people like him, who woke up early, worked hard, and came home exhausted every day. How many of them relied on public hospitals? How many had kids in public schools? How many had been hurt by Pinnacle Construction's corruption schemes? Arriving home, a modest two-bedroom house in Round Hill, Thomas found Emily studying at the kitchen table. At 22, she was a determined young woman with her mother's brown hair and her father's observant eyes. "Hi, Dad. How was work?" Thomas looked at his daughter, her business administration book spread across the table, and felt the weight of responsibility. How could he explain he'd uncovered a multi-million-dollar corruption scheme? How could he say he was risking everything for justice? "Emily, I need to talk to you about something very serious." She looked up from her books, concerned. Did something happen? Thomas sat down and told her everything. The documents he'd found, the CEO's humiliation, the blackmail, Mrs. Helen's arrival, the plan to investigate the company. Emily listened quietly, asking pointed questions, analyzing the situation with the sharp mind her studies were honing. "Dad, you realize you're dealing with very powerful people?" "I do. But I also know if I do nothing, I'll spend the rest of my life knowing I could have helped and didn't. What if it goes wrong, if they fire you, if you can't get another job?" Thomas considered Emily's question, the same one he'd been asking himself all day. "Then we'll face the challenges together. You could take a break from school, I'll find other work." "Dad, stop." Emily took his hand. "I'm not pausing my studies, and you're not finding another job." "What do you mean?" "You're going to do the right thing, and I'm going to help you." Thomas's eyes widened. "Emily, you're studying to be a business administrator, not an investigator. Business administration includes auditing, financial analysis, risk management." She smiled. "And during 3 years of college, I studied many cases of corporate corruption. I know how these things work, but it's dangerous. Dad, you raised me to be an honest person. Now you're giving me the chance to put that into practice." That night, father and daughter stayed up late talking about strategies, about how to map out the corruption in the company, about how to protect the people who decided to cooperate. Emily showed Thomas concepts he wasn't familiar with. Money, laundering, fake invoices, shell companies, overbilling on construction projects. Thomas showed Emily how the company worked from the inside, who the trustworthy people were, where the security cameras were located, which times were safest for private conversations. "Dad, I need to ask you something," said Emily when it was already past midnight. "Go ahead. Are you sure you can trust this, Mrs. Helen?" The question caught Thomas by surprise. All day he had focused on her proposal, on what it would mean to accept or refuse. But he hadn't questioned the woman's motives. "Why? Do you think it could be a trap?" "I don't know, but she's Richard Jr.'s mother. Maybe she's just trying to protect her son in a different way." Thomas thought about it. It was possible Mrs. Helen was feigning outrage, planning to use him to find out what else they knew about the schemes, and then get rid of all the problems at once. "It's possible," he admitted. "But even if it is a trap, I'm already in the middle of it. The only difference is that now I have a chance to do something about it. Then let's do it right." Emily got up and went to fetch a notebook. "We'll document everything, make copies of everything, have proof of everything. If it is a trap, at least we won't walk into it blind." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. The next morning, Thomas arrived at the company with a strange feeling. For the first time in 23 years, he wasn't just going to tend to plants. He had a much bigger mission. Mrs. Dorothy was waiting for him near the parking lot, her face tense with worry. "Thomas, I heard you were called in to Dr. Richard Jr.'s office yesterday. Is everything all right? Yes, Mrs. Dorothy. Actually, it's better than I expected. He told her about the conversation with Mrs. Helen, about the proposal to investigate the company, about the unexpected promotion. Mrs. Dorothy listened with wide eyes. Thomas, are you sure this isn't a trap? She was the second person in less than 12 hours to ask the same question. Thomas began to wonder if he wasn't being too naive. It might be, but if it is, at least we'll find out together. Together? Mrs. Dorothy, I need your help. You know this company better than anyone. You know where the secrets are, who the trustworthy people are, what happens behind the scenes. The cleaner looked around nervously. Thomas, I'm 62 years old. I can't risk losing my job now. I understand. But if we don't do anything, how many more people will keep suffering because of these thefts? Mrs. Dorothy fell silent for a few minutes thinking. All right, but we'll be very careful. Deal. Now tell me, besides George from the storeroom, who else quit under suspicious circumstances? There's Jessica, who worked in the purchasing department. One day she was here, the next she had left to take care of her sick mother out of town. Only I knew her mother. She had passed away 2 years earlier. Thomas made mental notes. He was starting to see a pattern. People who asked too many questions or had access to sensitive information were removed from the company. And the people still here, who do you think might have seen something? There's Mr. Joseph from the storeroom. He replaced George and has been very nervous lately. There's Rachel at the reception, who takes strange calls in the middle of the night. And there's Charles from the finance department, who's always dressed way above his pay grade. Could Charles be involved in the schemes? Or he's being paid very well to keep quiet? Thomas spent the rest of the morning discreetly observing the employees Mrs. Dorothy had mentioned. Mr. Joseph, a man in his early 50s, did seem nervous. Rachel, the receptionist, avoided eye contact with everyone. Charles from finance wore expensive clothes and drove a car far beyond his means. At lunchtime, Thomas decided to approach Mr. Joseph. He found him alone in the storeroom, eating a sandwich and staring blankly. "Hi, Mr. Joseph. How are you?" The man jumped from his chair, startled. "Thomas, you scared me." "Sorry. Mind if I sit?" Joseph hesitated before nodding. "Mr. Joseph, can I ask you a strange question?" "What kind of question?" "George, who worked here before you, did he say anything to you before he left?" Joseph visibly paled. "Why are you asking that?" "Because I don't think he left voluntarily." The silence that followed was tense. Joseph glanced at the door, as if checking if anyone was listening. "Thomas, some things are better left unsaid, but some things need to be said, to protect those who stay." Joseph let out a deep sigh. "George came to me 2 days before he left. He was terrified, said he'd seen strange activity in the inventory, materials leaving without requisitions, invoices that didn't match the deliveries. And then? Then he started asking questions, wanted to understand the system, check documents, talk to suppliers." Joseph paused. "A week later, he quit." "Did he tell you anything else?" "He said he was sure they were diverting materials from public projects, that hospitals and schools were getting lower quality supplies than what was being billed." Thomas felt a surge of anger. It wasn't just money being stolen, it was the quality of construction for those who needed it most. "Mr. Joseph, do you have access to the documents George was investigating?" "I do, but Thomas, I have a family to feed. I can't get involved in this." "What if I guarantee you'll be protected?" "How?" Thomas told him about his conversation with Mrs. Helen, the proposal to clean up the company, and the promise to protect cooperating employees. Joseph listened carefully but remained skeptical. "Thomas, this Mrs. Helen could be faking it. She might be trying to find out who else knows about the schemes to get rid of everyone at once. Maybe. But if she wanted to get rid of me, she would have done it yesterday. Instead, she offered me a promotion. A promotion could just be giving you enough rope to hang yourself." Joseph's observation was sharp. Thomas began to wonder if he was being used. "Even so," Thomas said, "what do you think will happen if we do nothing? The schemes will continue, more people will be mysteriously fired, and the public will keep getting hurt." Joseph was thoughtful for a few minutes. "All right, I'll show you what George was investigating, but if this goes wrong, if I lose my job, I want you to know I have 3 young kids. I understand the responsibility, Mr. Joseph. Joseph led Thomas to a back room in the storeroom where old files were kept. From a locked drawer, he pulled out a folder of documents. These are material requisitions from the last 6 months. George compared them to what was actually delivered to the sites. Thomas examined the documents. Even with his limited education, he could see the discrepancies. Requests for high-quality cement, but deliveries of standard-grade cement. Requests for special construction-grade steel, but deliveries of inferior steel. My God, he murmured. Are the hospitals and schools being built with second-rate materials? Worse than that, in some cases third-rate. Joseph pointed to a requisition. Look here, Northside Hospital. Request for special anti-inflammatory wall paint. Delivery, standard paint that catches fire easily. Thomas felt his stomach turn. Stealing money was one thing. Putting lives at risk was something entirely different. How many projects have been affected? From what George managed to verify, all public works from the last 2 years. Hospitals, schools, daycares, clinics. And what happens to the quality difference? The money saved goes where you'd expect. And if any construction has issues in the future, the blame will fall on natural wear and tear or improper use. Thomas photographed all the documents with the phone Emily had lent him. It was a simple phone, but the camera was enough to capture the evidence. Mr. Joseph, is there anything else George discovered? Yes, but this is even more dangerous. What? He found out some politicians know about the schemes, and they're taking bribes to approve the projects, even knowing the materials are subpar. Thomas realized he was stepping into much deeper waters than he'd imagined. This wasn't just corporate corruption. It was a scheme involving politicians, endangering lives, harming millions. Does he have proof? He did, but he took everything when he left, said he'd keep it somewhere safe. Do you know where he is now? Yes, he's working as a security guard at a mall in the metro area, making half what he earned here, but at least he's alive. The word alive echoed in Thomas's mind. Joseph had said it as if there were doubts about George's safety. Mr. Joseph, do you think George's life was in danger? Thomas, when you mess with this much money, with powerful politicians, anyone's life could be at risk. Thomas left the storage room with a heavy feeling in his chest. This wasn't just about doing the right thing anymore. It was about survival. That afternoon he tried talking to Rachel, the receptionist, but she was visibly nervous and refused to discuss anything related to strange phone calls or documents. Thomas, she said when he pressed, some things are better left unknown for your own good. At the end of the workday, Thomas headed to Mrs. Helen's office. Her secretary, a middle-aged woman named Sarah, greeted him with surprise. Mr. Thomas, is Mrs. Helen expecting you? No, but I need to speak with her urgently. Sarah made an internal call, and to Thomas's surprise, he was allowed in immediately. Mrs. Helen was reviewing papers when he entered. She looked up and gestured for him to sit. Mr. Thomas, how was your first day as an investigator? Complicated, ma'am. I found things I didn't expect. What kind of things? Thomas told her about his conversation with Joseph, the subpar materials, the risks to the public. Mrs. Helen listened silently, and Thomas saw her expression grow increasingly grave. Subpar materials? She asked when he finished. Yes, ma'am. Cement, steel, paint, all far below the quality specified in the contracts. Mrs. Helen stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. Mr. Thomas, when my husband and I founded this company, our promise was to build with quality, even in the simplest projects, even in the least profitable ones. And now? Now I've discovered that my son turned our company into a machine that puts lives at risk. She turned to Thomas and he saw tears in her eyes. Ma'am, we can fix this. We can identify all the compromised projects, correct the issues. And the costs? Who's going to pay to rebuild entire hospitals? To rewire a whole school? To reconstruct a daycare with proper materials? Thomas realized the scale of the problem. It wasn't just about returning stolen money. It was about redoing entire constructions, which would cost far more than what had been embezzled. Can the company handle these expenses? I don't know. We may have to sell assets, lay off employees, drastically downsize operations. Mrs. Helen sighed. We may have to shut down. The possibility of the company closing sent Thomas into a panic. If that happened, hundreds of families would lose their jobs, including his own. Mom, are you sure this is what we should do? Mr. Johnson, what's the alternative? Pretend we don't know. Let hospitals built with subpar materials keep receiving patients. Allow children to study in schools that could collapse. Thomas knew she was right, but that didn't ease his fear of what might come next. What if we handle this discreetly, fix the problems little by little without causing an uproar, and give the guilty parties time to cover their tracks? Destroy evidence, pressure witnesses? No, ma'am, that's not what I'm suggesting. Then what are you suggesting? Thomas thought for a few minutes. This was a decision that would affect hundreds of lives, including his own and Emily's. I'm suggesting we do the right thing, but smartly. Gather all the evidence first, protect those who cooperate, and have a plan to minimize harm to innocent employees. Mrs. Helen nodded slowly. Go on. We identify all the problematic projects, calculate the real costs of fixing them, and find ways to fund the repairs without bankrupting the company completely. And the guilty? They pay, with prison, with returning every stolen dollar, with losing political rights if necessary. Including my son? The question hung in the air. Thomas saw the pain in Mrs. Helen's eyes and understood this was the hardest decision of her life. Ma'am, your son committed serious crimes. If he doesn't pay for them, others will pay in his place. Mrs. Helen sat down heavily. You're right, but turning in your own son won't be easy. It won't, but it's necessary. At that moment, the office door swung open without warning. Richard stormed in like a hurricane, followed by his secretary Sarah, who tried to explain he hadn't been announced. Mum, we need to talk. Now, he said, glaring at Thomas with hostility. Richard, I'm in a meeting. A meeting with the gardener? He laughed sarcastically. Mom, how long are you going to keep up this charade? This charade is uncovering the extent of your crimes. Richard paled. My crimes? Substandard? Materials in hospitals, Richard. Children studying in schools built with third-rate cement. Patients being treated in hospitals that could catch fire because you skimped on paint. Mum, don't call me Mum. Mothers don't raise sons who gamble lives for money. The silence that followed was devastating. Thomas watched Richard crumble under his own mother's accusation. I didn't know the materials were that bad. You didn't know? Or didn't want to know? I just wanted to increase profits. Everyone does it. Not everyone, Richard. People like you do. Richard turned to Thomas with hatred. This is your fault. You destroyed my family. No, Mr. Bennett. Thomas stood up. You destroyed your family when you decided to steal money from hospitals and schools. How dare you accuse me? You're a gardener, a nobody. I am a gardener, yes, but I'm an honest one. And that's a lot more than you can say for yourself. Richard Bennett Jr. lunged at Thomas Johnson, but Mrs. Helen Bennett stepped between them. Richard, stop. He disrespected me. He told the truth, and truth isn't disrespect. Richard looked at his mother, at Thomas, at the mess he'd made with his own choices. Fine, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. You want the truth? I'll give you the truth. He sank heavily into an armchair. It started 3 years ago. The company was struggling, competition was fierce, costs were rising. I had to find ways to cut expenses. And you chose to cut corners on public projects? Mrs. Helen asked. It wasn't like that at first. Small substitutions. One brand of cement for another. Steel of a slightly lower grade. Nothing that seriously compromised safety. But it escalated? Yes. With every project, I saw how much money we could save, and with every cut, profits grew. The company rebounded, shareholders were happy. I was praised for optimizing processes. Thomas listened with a mix of fascination and horror. It was like watching a man confess how he'd slowly become a criminal. And the politicians, Mrs. Helen pressed. They noticed I was improving costs. Some wanted a share of the benefits. I figured, better to give them a cut than lose. All public contracts. So you started paying bribes? Commissions, I called them commissions. Richard, Mrs. Helen sat beside her son. Do you realize people might have died because of your choices? No one died, Richard snapped. Just minor cuts, nothing that... Hospitals with flammable paint, Richard. Schools with weak foundations. How can you be sure no one was hurt? Richard fell silent. For the first time, he seemed to truly face the consequences. I didn't think about it. Didn't think? Or didn't want to? Maybe I didn't want to? Thomas watched mother and son, and for the first time, he almost pitied Richard. It didn't excuse his crimes, but he saw a man who'd lost himself, one bad decision at a time. Mr. Richard, Thomas said, how many projects were affected? Richard looked up, startled, as if he'd forgotten Thomas was there. You really want to know? I do, so we can fix them. All of them. Richard sighed. Every public project in the last 3 years. How many is that? 17 hospitals, 23 schools, 8 daycares, 5 clinics, 3 police stations. Thomas did the math. Tens of thousands of people use those buildings daily. And the cost to fix everything? At least $60 million. Mrs. Helen gasped. 60 million? The company doesn't have that kind of money. We do, Mom. Over 3 years, we saved exactly that much on materials. But it's already gone. Extra profits for shareholders, commissions for politicians, company upgrades. So we'll have to sell assets, Mrs. Helen said. Or... Richard hesitated. Or what? Or we pretend we don't know and leave things as they are. Thomas's anger flared. Pretend? You're suggesting we ignore hospitals that could catch fire? Thomas, you don't understand the implications. I understand perfectly. I understand that people could suffer or die because you wanted to save a few bucks. It's not just a few bucks, it's millions. If the company goes, under 800 families lose their jobs. And if a hospital catches fire, how many families lose a father, a mother, or a child? Thomas's question left Richard Jr. speechless. Mrs. Helen looked at the two men, seeing valid arguments on both sides. There's a third option, she finally said. What? We create a correction schedule. We prioritize the highest risk situations, sell assets gradually to fund the repairs, and hand over all the evidence to the authorities. And what about me? Richard Jr. asked. You'll have to face the consequences of your actions. But if you cooperate with the investigation, if you help fix the problems, maybe the law will go easier on you. Richard Jr. fell silent for a few minutes, weighing his options. And if I refuse to cooperate, then you become a fugitive, and I turn over all the evidence anyway. Mum, would you really do that? Richard, I love you, but I love the truth more. And I love even more the people who could be hurt by your greed. Thomas watched the family conversation and realized he was witnessing a historic moment in their lives. Mrs. Helen was choosing between her son and justice. And she was choosing justice. All right, Richard Jr. said finally, I'll cooperate. But I want guarantees that my family will be protected. What kind of guarantees? My wife, my kids, they don't know anything. I don't want them exposed publicly. That will depend on how much truth you tell and how quickly we fix the problems. Richard Jr. nodded. Where do we start? Mrs. Helen looked at Thomas. Mr. Thomas, since you're coordinating the investigation, what's the next step? Thomas felt the weight of responsibility. He was being asked for strategies by people far more educated and experienced than him. First, we need a complete list of all the affected projects. Then a technical assessment of the risks for each one. The most dangerous ones must be fixed immediately. And who will do these assessments? We'll need to hire independent engineers, people with no ties to the company. That'll cost money. It will, but it'll cost far less than waiting for a tragedy to happen. Richard Jr. shifted in his chair. Thomas, can I ask you something? Go ahead. Why are you doing this? You could have stayed quiet, gone on with your normal life as a gardener. Thomas thought about the question. Why was he risking everything? Because I have a daughter, and one day she might need a public hospital or work in a public school, and I can't look her in the eye knowing I could have helped make those places safer and didn't. Thomas's answer left Richard Jr. thoughtful. What if I offered you money to stay quiet? A lot of money? I wouldn't take it. Why not? Because money buys silence, but it doesn't buy a clear conscience. Richard Jr. nodded slowly. You're a better man than I am, Thomas. I'm not better or worse. I just made different choices. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing, in the days that followed, Thomas found himself at the center of a complex operation. Mrs. Helen had formed a secret task force to investigate all the company's projects from the last 3 years. Besides Thomas, it included a lawyer specializing in corporate crimes, 2 independent auditors, and a renowned civil engineer. Emily, his daughter, had been officially hired as an intern to assist with analyzing the financial documents. Her degree in business administration was being put to the test in a way she never imagined. "Dad," she said one morning as they reviewed spreadsheets in the room designated for the investigation, "the numbers are much worse than we thought." "How so?" "The cuts weren't just in basic materials. They slashed safety systems, smoke detectors, emergency exits, everything that could be optimized." Thomas felt his stomach turn. With each new discovery, he realized the problem was even bigger. "Show me." Emily pointed to a spreadsheet on the computer screen. Northside Hospital. It was supposed to have a full smoke detection system and fire sprinklers. It was delivered with half the equipment, and the money that should have been used for that saved, meaning it ended up in someone's pocket. Thomas grabbed the phone and called Mrs. Helen. "Ma'am, you need to come here urgently. Emily found something." "That can't wait." 20 minutes later, Mrs. Helen was in the room, accompanied by engineer Paul Mitchell, a 50-year-old man specialized in building safety. Emily presented her findings to them. With each number revealed, Paul grew paler. "This is criminal," he finally said. "It's not just about cutting costs, it's about human lives." "How long do we have before something serious happens?" asked Mrs. Helen. "Impossible to predict. It could be tomorrow, it could be 10 years from now. But if there's a fire or emergency in any of these buildings, the consequences will be catastrophic." "And the cost to fix everything immediately?" Paul did quick calculations. "For imminent risks, about 15 million. For everything, the 60 million Richard Jr. mentioned." Mrs. Helen sat down heavily. 15 million we need to come up with in how long? 2 weeks at most. Impossible. The company doesn't have that kind of liquidity. It was Thomas. Who came up with the idea? "What if we made this public?" Everyone looked at him in surprise. "What do you mean?" asked Mrs. Helen. "We explain the situation to the public, the press, the authorities. We ask for help, start a campaign, turn this into a social movement." "Thomas, that would completely destroy the company's reputation." "The company is already destroyed, ma'am. The question is whether it'll be destroyed by hiding the problems or by trying to fix them." Paul Mitchell nodded. "Thomas is right. If we wait and something serious happens, the moral responsibility will be far greater." "And how would we explain to the public that their company was stealing money from hospitals?" "With the truth," said Emily, "by explaining that we uncovered the problems, that we're taking responsibility, and that we need help to fix everything quickly." Mrs. Helen was thoughtful for a few minutes. "And Richard Jr.? How will he react to having the crimes exposed publicly?" "He already agreed to cooperate," Thomas reminded her. "He agreed in private. Making it all public is very different." As if summoned, Richard Jr. appeared at the door. For the past week, he had been sporadically attending meetings, providing information about the schemes he'd created. "What are you all discussing?" he asked. "About making everything public," Mrs. Helen replied bluntly. Richard Jr. turned pale. "What do you mean, public?" Thomas explained the idea of mobilizing society to fix the problems quickly. "You're insane!" Richard Jr. exclaimed. "That would be corporate suicide." "Richard," Mrs. Helen said, "corporate suicide would be waiting for someone to get hurt or die because of our mistakes. Our mistakes, they were my mistakes. You have nothing to do with this." "Yes, we do. The moment we found out and did nothing, we became accomplices." Richard Jr. sat down and buried his head in his hands. "My life will be ruined. My career, my reputation, my family. Your life will be ruined if you don't do the right thing now," said Thomas. "If you cooperate, if you help save lives, you still have a chance to rebuild your reputation." "How?" By publicly admitting your mistakes, helping with the corrections, showing you've learned from them. Richard remained silent for several minutes. And my wife, my children, how do I explain to them that I'm a criminal? By telling them you made a mistake but are trying to make it right, said Mrs. Helen. It's better they hear it from you than from the press. What if they don't forgive me? Then you'll have to live with the consequences. Her voice was firm. But at least you'll live knowing you did the right thing in the end. Richard let out a deep sigh. All right, do what you think is best. But I want to be there when everything is revealed. I want to take personal responsibility for my actions. Thomas felt a twinge of respect for Richard. Despite all his mistakes, he was showing courage to face the consequences. Mr. Richard, may I ask you something? Go ahead. Do you regret what you did? Richard looked at Thomas, then at his mother, then at Emily and Paul. I regret it deeply. Not just for the problems we caused, but for becoming someone I no longer recognize. And if you could go back in time, I would never have started. But I can't go back, I can only try to fix the damage. Mrs. Helen stood up. Then it's settled. We'll prepare a full public statement. Thomas, I want you by my side. When we announce everything. Me, ma'am? You. You were the one who uncovered the problems. You were the one who had the courage to speak up. It's only fair that you explain to the public what happened. Thomas felt a mix of pride and terror. Public speaking wasn't something he was used to. Mrs. Helen, I'm not good at speaking. You're good at telling the truth, and that's what matters. That afternoon, as they prepared the statement that would change everything, Thomas received an unexpected call. It was Mr. Joseph from the warehouse, and his voice was trembling. Thomas, there are strange people lurking around the company. Dark-tinted cars, men in suits asking about you. What kind of questions? Where you live, if you have family, how long you've worked here. Thomas, I think you're in danger. Thomas felt a chill. He'd been so focused on the technical aspects of the investigation that he hadn't considered the possibility of outside pressure. Mr. Joseph, where are you now? In the third-floor bathroom. I didn't want to be seen calling. Can you meet me in the parking lot in 10 minutes? I can, but be careful, Thomas. Something's very wrong here. Thomas hung up and immediately went to find Mrs. Helen. He found her in her office, reviewing the statement that would be released the next morning. Ma'am, I think we have a problem. He told her about Joseph's call, about the strange men asking questions. This was expected, she said with some sadness. When you deal with this much money with powerful politicians, there are always attempts at intimidation. What do? We speed up the process. We release everything tomorrow, before anyone tries to stop us. What if they try something with my family? I've already arranged protection. Discreet but effective. Thomas's eyes widened. Protection? I hired a security company. Your daughter and sister are being discreetly watched. You did that without consulting me? I did. Because I knew if I had asked, you would have refused to avoid inconveniencing your family. Thomas realized she was right. He would have refused. And how much is this costing? Thomas, compared to what's at stake, this is a minimal investment in the safety of people I admire. Thomas left Mrs. Helen's office with mixed feelings. On one hand, he was grateful for her protection. On the other, he realized he'd gotten himself into something much bigger and more dangerous than he'd imagined. In the parking lot, he found Joseph visibly nervous. Thomas, I don't know if I should be here. I think they're watching me too. Who's watching? I don't know, but ever since this investigation started, I've had the feeling I'm being followed. Mr. Joseph, do you want to stop? You can. No one's forcing you to continue. I can't stop now. If I do, they'll know I know something. It's better to keep going and hope for the best. Thomas understood the dilemma. Once you were in the investigation, leaving was just as dangerous as staying. Do you have family? I do, a wife and 3 young kids. Joseph paused. Thomas, if anything happens to me, will you make sure my family's taken care of? Mr. Joseph, nothing's going to happen. It might. And if it does, I want to know someone will look after them. I promise. But it won't be necessary. Joseph nodded, but Thomas could see he wasn't convinced. Thomas, there's one more thing you should know. What? George, the guy who worked here before me, he's not at the metro area mall anymore. What? Do you mean? I went looking for him over the weekend. The mall staff said he quit a week ago and didn't leave an address. Thomas's stomach turned to ice. What about his family? Gone too. The house they lived in is empty. Mr. Joseph, do you think? I don't know what to think, Thomas. But George was scared, really scared, and now he's disappeared. Thomas hurried back inside the company with a sense of urgency. He found Mrs. Helen and told her about George's disappearance. Ma'am, I don't think we can wait until tomorrow. We need to go public today. Today? But we haven't finished preparing. If we wait, it might be too late. For us and for others. Mrs. Helen heard the urgency in his voice. All right, we'll call a press conference for this afternoon. You alert the engineers and auditors. I'll notify the press. By 3 o'clock, the auditorium at Pinnacle Construction was packed. Journalists, city officials, regulatory representatives, and even some residents from communities affected by the construction projects were there. Thomas sat at a table on stage beside Mrs. Helen, Richard Jr., Paul Mitchell, and Emily. His hands trembled slightly, but his resolve was firm. Mrs. Helen stood to speak first. Ladies and gentlemen, we've called this press conference to disclose serious information about irregularities in public construction projects carried out by our company over the last 3 years. A murmur spread through the room. Camera flashes began popping. During an internal investigation, we discovered substandard materials were used in hospitals, schools, daycares, and other public buildings. This has endangered the safety of thousands. The murmurs turned to outraged exclamations. I want to make it clear these irregularities were uncovered thanks to the courage of one of our employees, Mr. Thomas Johnson, who found incriminating documents and chose to report the issue rather than stay silent. Thomas felt every eye turn to him. Cameras zoomed in, and the weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders. Mr. Johnson will now explain how he discovered the problems and what we've done since to assess the extent of the damage. Thomas stood on shaky legs. He looked at the crowded room and took a deep breath. My name is Thomas Johnson. I've worked as a gardener at this company for 23 years. 3 weeks ago, I found some papers in the finance department's trash. He told the whole story. The discovery of the documents, the humiliation by the CEO, the investigation, conducted alongside Mrs. Helen Bennett, the findings about substandard materials and safety risks. And we discovered that dozens of public buildings were compromised. Hospitals without proper fire safety systems, schools with weakened structures, daycares with toxic materials. A journalist raised her hand. Mr. Johnson, why did you decide to speak up? Did you know you were risking your job? I have a daughter, and I thought she might one day need those hospitals or work in those schools. I couldn't stay silent knowing there was danger. And now? What will be done to fix the problems? Thomas looked at Mrs. Helen, who signaled for him to continue. The company will correct all the constructions. We'll replace all inadequate materials, install all the safety systems that were omitted, and ensure everything matches the original design. And who will pay for it? The company, even if it means selling assets, downsizing operations, or even shutting down. A city official stood up. Mr. Johnson, do you have any idea of the total cost of these corrections? $60 million. Gasps of surprise echoed through the auditorium. And does the company have that money? Thomas glanced at Mrs. Helen, who nodded. We'll find a way. One way or another, we'll find a way. It was then that Richard Jr. stood up. The room fell silent. I'd like to speak. Mrs. Helen looked at him with concern, but Richard Jr. was determined. My name is Richard Bennett Jr. I'm the CEO of this company and responsible for all the irregularities being revealed today. The silence was absolute. I want to publicly apologize to everyone harmed by my decisions. I take full responsibility for the crimes I committed. Richard paused, visibly emotional. For 3 years, I authorized the use of inferior materials in public projects to increase company profits. I bribed politicians to approve projects I knew were compromised. I threatened employees who tried to report the issues. Why confess now? Shouted a reporter. Because Mr. Johnson showed me there's something more important than profit. There's dignity. There's responsibility to the people who trust our work. Richard turned to Thomas. "Mr. Johnson, I want to thank you for having the courage I lacked, for doing the right thing when I was only doing wrong." Thomas felt his eyes well up. He hadn't expected this public acknowledgement. "And I want to tell everyone here, starting today I'll fully cooperate with the authorities. I'll assist in all investigations, provide any necessary information, and accept whatever punishment is determined." The room erupted in chatter. Reporters spoke over each other. Officials scribbled notes frantically. Cameras flashed non-stop. Mrs. Helen took the microphone again. "Additionally, we're creating an emergency fund for immediate corrections to the highest risk buildings. Anyone who wishes to contribute to speeding up repairs can do so through the company's website." "And if the contributions aren't enough?" asked a journalist. "Then we'll sell whatever's necessary. This company was founded 40 years ago on honesty. If we must undo everything to become honest again, we will." The press conference lasted 2 more hours. Thomas answered dozens of questions, explained technical details with Paul Mitchell's help, and recounted his journey from gardener to investigator. When it ended, Thomas felt exhausted but relieved. The truth was out. Now came dealing with the consequences. Mrs. Helen approached him as the auditorium emptied. Mr. Thomas, how do you feel?" Scared, relieved, proud, all at the same time. "Now comes the hardest part." "What part?" "Keeping all the promises we made today." Thomas nodded. He was right. Revealing the problems had only been the first step. Fixing them would be far more complicated. That night, Thomas arrived home and found Emily watching the news. His interview was playing on TV. "Dad, you've made national headlines." Thomas sat beside his daughter and saw his own image on screen talking about dignity and social responsibility. "I'm scared, Emily." "Scared of what?" "That we won't be able to keep all our promises. That we've raised expectations we can't meet. Dad, at least we're trying. It's better to try and fail than never try at all. What if I lose my job anyway? What if the company shuts down? Then we'll find another way to live, but at least we'll live knowing we did the right thing." Thomas hugged his daughter. At 22, she showed a wisdom that surprised him. "Emily, do you regret getting involved in this?" "Regret? Dad, it's the first time in my life I've felt like I'm doing something truly important. Even with the risks? Especially with the risks. The important things in life always involve risk." Thomas slept that night with a strange sense of peace. He had done the right thing, no matter the cost. The next morning, he arrived at the company and found a crowd at the door. Journalists, onlookers, employees, officials. The security guard recognized him and let him through. "Mr. Thomas," a reporter shouted, "how does it feel to be called a hero?" "I'm no hero, just a gardener who did what any decent person would do. But not everyone would have the courage. Then maybe we should teach courage in schools. So, cases like this won't need heroes." Thomas entered the building and went straight to the investigation room. He found Mrs. Helen Bennett, Paul Mitchell, and a team of engineers reviewing blueprints and plans. "How are things?" he asked. "Complicated," Mrs. Helen replied. "After yesterday's press conference, the Attorney General's office opened an official investigation. The Criminal Investigation Department wants to question Richard Jr., and regulatory agencies are demanding detailed reports on all construction projects." "And the company?" "Still running, but several ongoing projects have been suspended. Some clients cancelled contracts. The financial situation is getting worse fast." Paul Mitchell approached with a blueprint in hand. "Thomas, I need to show you something urgent." "What?" "Northside Hospital, it's worse than we thought." He spread the blueprint on the table and pointed to red markings. The support beams in the emergency room were made with substandard steel. With the weight of equipment and constant movement, they're starting to give way. Thomas felt his blood run cold. Give way how? The ceiling could collapse any moment. How many people use that emergency room daily? About 1,500. Mrs. Helen stepped forward quickly. "Paul, how urgent is this?" "Critical. It needs to be evacuated today. Now. How long to fix?" 2 weeks if we work day and night." "And the cost?" $3 million. Mrs. Helen grabbed the phone immediately. "I'll call the hospital director. Thomas, come with me. We'll have to explain the situation." in person. An hour later, Thomas stood at Northside Hospital, watching the bustling emergency room, doctors rushing, ambulances arriving, anxious families waiting for news. The hospital director, Dr. Frank Cooper, a man in his 50s, looked under immense pressure. "Mrs. Helen, are you absolutely certain there's imminent danger?" "We are, and we can't take the risk." She showed Paul Mitchell's report. The beams could give way at any moment, but evacuating the emergency room means transferring over 200 patients. Where are we going to put them? In the other hospitals in the network. I know it'll cause overcrowding, but... Overcrowding? Dr. Frank nearly shouted. It'll cause a collapse. The other hospitals are already at capacity. Thomas watched the argument unfold and grasped the scale of the problem they'd created. It wasn't just about money. It was about human lives that would be affected by fixing these mistakes. "Dr. Frank," Thomas said, "what would the alternative be?" The alternative would have been to build it right from the start. The doctor was visibly angry. "Do you have any idea what closing an emergency room means?" "We do. But we also know what it means if a roof collapses on doctors and patients." Dr. Frank let out a deep sigh. "How long do you need to fix it?" 2 weeks. 2 weeks with the emergency room closed. 2 weeks of patients being sent to hospitals. That can't handle them properly. "Doctor," Mrs. Helen said, "if there's any way to speed up the process..." "There isn't. Work of this scale can't be rushed without compromising safety even further." It was Thomas who came up with the idea. "What if we set up a temporary emergency room?" Everyone turned to him. "What do you mean?" "Doctor," Frank asked. "A field hospital. In the parking lot, the courtyard somewhere nearby. Something that can function in emergencies while the main ER is being fixed." Dr. Frank and Mrs. Helen exchanged glances. "Is that possible?" "It is, but it'd be very expensive and complicated to implement." "How expensive?" "Another $2 million, and we'd need special approval from health authorities." "And how long to set it up?" "A week if we get all the approvals quickly." Mrs. Helen didn't hesitate. "Do it. Cover all the costs, handle the bureaucracy, do whatever it takes." "Mrs. Helen," Dr. Frank said, "that means $5 million just for this hospital. Do you have that kind of money?" "We'll find it." Thomas saw the determination in her eyes and realized Mrs. Helen was willing to liquidate the entire company if necessary to fix the problems. Leaving the hospital, Thomas felt crushed by the weight of responsibility. Every decision affected hundreds of lives. Every delay could lead to tragedy. "Mrs. Helen, how are we going to raise $5 million in a week?" "By selling assets, mortgaging properties, taking out loans, and if we can't, we will. One way or another, we will." Thomas admired her resolve, but was also worried about the plan's feasibility. What if the company goes under in the process? "Thomas, if we save lives, it's worth the company going under." When they got back to the office, they found an unexpected scene. Richard Jr. was being led away by the Criminal Investigation Department, handcuffed under the flashes of dozens of cameras. "What's happening?" Mrs. Helen asked Sarah, the secretary. "The Attorney General's office requested his arrest. They claimed flight risk and evidence tampering." Mrs. Helen rushed to speak to her son, but the officers wouldn't allow it. "Richard!" she shouted. He turned and looked at her with a mix of sorrow and resignation. "Mum, take care of the company. Take care of Thomas. Keep all the promises we made, and he was taken away." Thomas watched Mrs. Helen break down in tears and felt deep compassion for the woman who had chosen justice over her own son. "Mrs. Helen." "I'm fine, Thomas." She wiped her tears. "I knew this would happen. It's the price he has to pay for his mistakes. What now?" "Now we keep going. Richard may be in jail, but people still need hospitals." That afternoon, Thomas witnessed a mobilization he would never forget. Mrs. Helen reached out to all her contacts, sold 2 company properties, secured bank loans, and within 6 hours had gathered the $5 million needed for the hospital. "How did you manage this?" Thomas asked, impressed. "When you're doing the right thing, people help. Even in the middle of a crisis, some still believe in us." "But what if the money isn't enough for all the hospitals?" "Then we'll get more. One project at a time, one problem at a time." Thomas spent the following days rushing between construction sites, overseeing repairs and reviewing engineering reports. His new official title was Public Works Recovery Coordinator, a position created especially for him. Emily had temporarily put college on hold to work full-time at the company. Her experience in business administration proved crucial for organizing schedules and budgets. A week after the press conference, Thomas received a call that alarmed him. It was Joseph's wife. "Mr. Thomas, my husband hasn't come home in 2 days. What do you mean?" "He left for work on Monday and never returned. At work they said he never showed up. No one knows where he is." Thomas felt his stomach drop. It was exactly what had happened to George. "Did you go to the police?" "I did. They said they can't investigate a disappearance until after 72 hours. "Did anyone see anything unusual?" "The neighbors said they noticed a dark car parked on our street Sunday night. Men in suits watching the house." Thomas hung up and immediately went to Mrs. Helen. "Ma'am, Joseph is missing. Like George?" "Exactly like George, and his family is desperate." Mrs. Helen closed her eyes for a moment. "Thomas, I think it's time to ask for official police protection." "For who?" "For all of us, you, me, Emily, every employee cooperating with the investigation. What if the police won't provide protection? Then we hire private security. The company still has the resources." Thomas spent the rest of the day worried about Joseph and his family. That evening, he decided to visit Joseph's wife in person. Mrs. Martha was a woman in her 40s, mother of 3 young children. When Thomas arrived, she was visibly shaken. "Mr. Thomas, thank you for coming." "Mrs. Martha, tell me everything that happened." Joseph had been very nervous this past week, said he felt like he was being watched. On Sunday, he went out to buy bread and came back terrified. Did he say what happened? He was sure men were following him, that he'd seen the same car in different places throughout the day. And on Monday, he left for work as usual. Said he needed to talk to you about something important, and then he never came back. Thomas grew alarmed. Joseph had wanted to talk to him about something important and disappeared before he could. Do you have any idea what he wanted to tell? Me? I think he found something new. He stayed late at the office on Friday going through old files. What kind of files? I don't know. But Saturday morning, he told me he'd found something that changed everything. Thomas felt like he was missing a crucial piece of the puzzle. Joseph had discovered something important and vanished before he could share it. "Mrs. Martha, would you let me look through the papers Joseph had at home? Maybe he brought copies of something." "Of course, anything that helps find him." Thomas spent 2 hours examining the documents Joseph had taken home. Most of it was old requests, material spreadsheets, invoices. But in a separate folder, he found something that made him stop. They were documents for a construction project he wasn't familiar with, Hope Gardens Municipal Daycare. What startled him was the date. The construction had been completed just 2 weeks prior. "Mrs. Martha, do you know why Joseph was interested in this daycare?" "I do. Our youngest daughter goes there. He picked her up on Friday and noticed something was wrong with the building." "What kind of thing?" "He said the walls had cracks that were too big for such a new construction, and that some rooms had a strange smell." Thomas examined the documents more closely. The Hope Gardens Municipal Daycare had cost 2 million reais, but based on the materials listed in the paperwork, it shouldn't have cost more than 800,000. But there was something even more alarming. The daycare had been built in the last few months, long after the investigation had begun. That meant someone had continued the schemes even after the company had uncovered the problems. "Mrs. Martha, I need to leave urgently, but I promise we'll find Joseph." "Mr. Thomas," he was scared, really scared. He said if anything happened to him, I should come to you. "Why?" "Because you were the only person he trusted completely." Thomas went home with a heavy heart. Joseph had disappeared, possibly kidnapped or worse, because of the investigation he had started. When he got home, he found Emily studying the investigation documents at the kitchen table. "Dad, I found something strange in the numbers." "What?" "Some construction projects were overbilled even after we started the investigation, like someone was still running the schemes." Thomas showed her the daycare documents Joseph had taken home. That's it. Hope Gardens daycare was finished 2 weeks ago, but according to the paperwork, the scheme is still going. Emily analyzed the papers. Dad, this means Richard Jr. wasn't the only one involved, or that someone took over the schemes after he was arrested. But who? Someone with access to the company's systems, who knows the suppliers, who knows how to manipulate the documents. Thomas thought about who had that level of access. Very few people in the company had enough knowledge to keep the corruption schemes running. Emily, tomorrow we need to find out who authorized these recent projects. And if we discover more people are involved, then we'll expose them too. It doesn't matter how many people are part of this. That night, Thomas barely slept. He thought about Joseph, about George, about how many others might be in danger because of the investigation. The next morning, he arrived at the company determined to find out who was keeping the schemes going. He went to Mrs. Helen and showed her the daycare documents. Ma'am, someone in the company is still running these corruption schemes. Mrs. Helen examined the documents with growing concern. That's impossible. After Richard Jr. was arrested, I personally took control of all operations. But these documents prove the daycare was overbilled the same way as the earlier projects. Who authorized this project? Thomas checked the signatures. Dr. William Parker. Mrs. Helen went pale. The company's lawyer. Does he have the authority to approve projects? Yes. As legal counsel, he can approve contracts in my name when I'm in meetings or traveling. And were you in a meeting when this project was approved? Mrs. Helen checked her schedule. I was. A meeting with auditors from the Attorney General's office that lasted all day. Thomas felt they had found the second person responsible for the schemes. What do we do now? That's now we're investigating Dr. William discreetly. If he finds out we suspect him, he could destroy evidence or disappear like George and Joseph. How do we investigate without raising suspicions? You'll keep pretending you're focused on the old projects. I'll request a full audit of the contracts he approved in the last few months. Thomas spent the following days hiding his suspicions while gathering information about William Parker. He discovered the lawyer had approved at least 5 public projects in the last 2 months, all with signs of overbilling. Mrs. Dorothy, the cleaning lady, brought the most crucial piece of information. Thomas, you know Dr. William has strange meetings, right? What kind of meetings? Oh, late-night meetings with men who don't work for the company, always in his office after everyone leaves. Have you seen these men? Yes, well-dressed men, expensive cars, but they don't look like office workers. What? Do you mean? They look like they're involved in other things, less legal things. Thomas understood Mrs. Dorothy's implication. William might be involved with dangerous people. Mrs. Dorothy, do you know if these meetings still happen? They do, every Thursday after 9 at night. It was Thursday. Thomas decided he needed to find out what happened in those meetings. Mrs. Dorothy, can you let me into the office after hours? Thomas, that's very dangerous if they catch you. If I don't find out what's going on, more people might disappear like Joseph and George. Mrs. Dorothy hesitated but agreed. At 9:30 that night, Thomas was hidden in a storage room near William's office. He could hear voices but couldn't make out the words. He took a risk, stepping out and moving silently down the hall to a spot where he could hear better. There can't be any more investigations, William's voice said. We already took care of 2. We can handle more, replied an unfamiliar voice. You don't understand. If anyone else disappears, they'll suspect me. Then find another solution. What solution? End the investigation. Prove there are no more irregularities. Convince the old lady and the gardener they've already uncovered everything. Thomas felt his blood run cold. They were talking about him and Mrs. Helen. And if they aren't convinced, then we'll have to take more definitive measures. Thomas decided he'd heard enough. He tried to slip back into the storage room but bumped into a chair, making noise. The voices stopped immediately. What was that? Someone asked. I'll check. Thomas ran to the storage room and hid behind a large filing cabinet. He heard footsteps in the hall, a door opening, someone checking rooms. No one's here. Must have been the wind. Wind doesn't knock over chairs. Then it must have been the security guard on patrol. Let's wrap up for tonight. Too risky. Thomas waited 20 more minutes before leaving. his hiding spot. When he finally stepped out of the building, he was drenched in cold sweat, his heart pounding. He'd discovered William was involved in the schemes and had ties to dangerous people, people who might be responsible for George and Joseph's disappearances. The next morning, he urgently sought out Mrs. Helen. "Ma'am, I found out who's continuing the schemes, and I found out our lives might be in danger." Thomas recounted what he'd overheard. Mrs. Helen turned pale. "Thomas, are you sure about what you heard?" "Absolutely. William is involved with dangerous people, and they're willing to do anything to stop the investigation, including eliminating us." "Including that." Mrs. Helen picked up the phone. "I'm calling the police right away. What if the police don't believe us? Then we'll have to protect ourselves." Calling the police was frustrating. The captain said overhearing conversations wasn't enough proof. They needed concrete evidence of William's involvement. "But what about George and Joseph's disappearance?" asked Thomas. "Without proof they were kidnapped, technically they're just people who left home voluntarily." Thomas hung up angrily. "Mrs. Helen, the police won't help us. Then we'll gather evidence ourselves." "How?" "By breaking into William's office and looking for documents that incriminate him." "That's too risky. Thomas, he's already threatened our lives. We have nothing left to lose." That night, Thomas and Mrs. Helen returned to the company. She had keys to all the offices, including William's. "If we're caught here," she said while unlocking the door, "we'll say I came to get documents from my own office." William's office was luxurious, with expensive furniture and law books neatly arranged on imposing shelves. Thomas felt uneasy going through another person's things, but he knew it was necessary. "Thomas, look at this." Mrs. Helen had found a folder labeled Special Operations. Inside were contracts, spreadsheets, and what looked like a schedule for future projects. "Look here, Southside Hospital, $3 million in overbilling. New District Public School, $2 million in overbilling," she read quietly. "He's planning to continue the schemes for at least 6 more months. And look at this." Thomas moved closer. It was a list of names with notes beside them. George Miller, resolved. Joseph Thompson, resolved. Thomas Johnson, pending. Helen Bennett, pending. Thomas's stomach turned. Resolved meant George and Joseph had been taken care of, and they were on the list as pending. "Mrs. Helen, we need to leave. Now." "Wait, there's more." She kept searching and found a notebook with handwritten notes. It was like a diary of William's operations. "Thomas, listen to this. Richard Jr. was an amateur. He limited the schemes out of fear. Now that he's gone, I can expand operations. The old woman and the gardener are problems, but problems have solutions." "What kind of solutions?" Mrs. Helen kept reading. "If necessary, I'll use the same methods that worked with George and Joseph. Accidents happen." Thomas couldn't take any more. "Mrs. Helen, let's go. We have enough evidence." They photographed all the incriminating documents and quickly left the office. In the parking lot, Thomas was still shaken. Now what? "Now we go straight to the police station. With this evidence, they'll have to take us seriously." At the station, the captain examined the photos carefully. "This is much more serious than I thought," he admitted. "I'll open an investigation immediately and issue an arrest warrant for William Parker." "What about our protection?" "I'll arrange police escorts for both of you, at least until we arrest William and find out where George and Joseph are." Thomas left the station feeling slightly safer, but still worried. William had resources and dangerous connections. Arresting him wouldn't be easy. The next day, he arrived at work and found William absent. His secretary said he called in sick, Sarah informed him. "Sick or on the run," Thomas muttered. Mrs. Helen arrived soon after, accompanied by 2 plainclothes officers. "Thomas, William cleared out his office overnight. He took all the important files." "How did you find out?" "The night guard said he was here from 2 to 5 in the morning. He left carrying several boxes." Thomas realized William had discovered they were investigating. There were probably security cameras in his office. What now? "Now the police have issued a search warrant for his house and alerts at airports and bus stations. Could he be trying to flee the country? Maybe, or he could be preparing for something worse." What Mrs. Helen meant by something worse became clear a few hours later. Thomas received a call on his cell phone. Thomas Johnson? Speaking. This is William Parker. We need to talk. We have nothing to talk about. Oh, we do. About George and Joseph. You want to know where they are, don't you? Thomas signaled to Mrs. Helen, who was standing beside him. Where are they? They're alive for now, but that could change depending on your next actions. What do you want? I want you to drop the investigation, destroy all the evidence you've gathered, convince the police there are no more crimes to investigate. And if I refuse, then George and Joseph will join Richard Jr. in prison, only it won't be the same kind of prison. It'll be one nobody walks out of. The threat was clear. Thomas looked at Mrs. Helen, who had heard the whole conversation. William, I won't stop the investigation, and the police already know everything. The police may know, but they can't prove it. Without George and Joseph as witnesses, you don't have solid cases against anyone. We have the documents you left in your office. William laughed. What documents? The ones you stole by breaking into my office. Illegally obtained evidence. Is worthless in court. Thomas realized William was right. If he claimed the documents were stolen, they couldn't be used as evidence. What are you proposing? An exchange? George and Joseph for your promise to stop the investigation. How do I know they're alive? Because I'll let you talk to them. Thomas heard rustling as the phone was passed. Then Joseph's weak voice. Thomas, is that you? Joseph, where are you? Are you both okay? We're in a warehouse somewhere. George is here with me. We're okay, but scared. Joseph, hang in there. We'll get you out. Thomas, they said if you don't stop the investigation, they'll... His voice cut off. William came back on the line. Heard enough? I have, but I won't stop the investigation. Then whatever happens to them is on you. It's on you, William. You're the one who kidnapped them. I didn't kidnap anyone. They came willingly when they found out their families were in danger. Thomas felt a wave of rage. William had used George and Joseph's families to blackmail them. Where do you want to meet? At the company warehouse. 11 tonight. Alone. And if I'm not alone? Then George and Joseph pay. The price for your disobedience. William hung up. Thomas stared at the phone, processing the situation. Thomas, Mrs. Helen said, you're not meeting him alone. I am. It's the only chance to save George and Joseph. It's an obvious trap, I know, but I can't let two people suffer because of my decision to investigate the company. Thomas, if something happens to you, who will finish the investigation? You will. Emily will. The police will. The investigation is bigger than me now. Mrs. Helen gripped his arm. Thomas, I can't let you walk into a trap alone. Mrs. Helen, you can't stop me. George and Joseph were taken because of me. Not because of you, because of the corruption they helped expose. The reason doesn't matter. What matters is I can save them. Thomas spent the rest of the day planning the meeting with William. He knew it was dangerous, but he also knew he couldn't abandon George and Joseph. At 10:30 that night, he arrived at the company warehouse. The place was dark, lit only by a few parking lot lights. William was waiting near the entrance, flanked by two large men Thomas didn't recognize. Thomas, I'm glad you came. Where are George and Joseph? They're safe for now. I want to see them. First, let's talk about the terms of our negotiation. Thomas stepped closer, but kept enough distance to run if needed. There's no negotiation. You release them and turn yourself in to the police. William laughed. Thomas, you're in no position to make demands. No, the police know where I am. If I don't return home, they'll come looking here. The police can look, but they won't find anything, and you'll be far away from here. Thomas realized he had underestimated the situation. William wasn't planning a negotiation. He was planning a kidnapping. William, this will only make things worse for you. You're already accused of corruption and kidnapping. Don't add more crimes. I have to, because it's the only way to stop this investigation once and for all. Thomas tried to step back, but the two men moved to block his exit. Where are George and Joseph? They're in the same place you're going, at least until I decide what to do with the three of you. It was then that Thomas heard police sirens in the distance, and he realized they were getting closer. William heard them too and grew nervous. How did the police find out? I told you they knew where I was. You said you wouldn't call the police. I didn't, but Mrs. Helen did. The sirens were very close now. William signaled to the two men. Take him, quick. Thomas tried to run but was grabbed by one of the men. He fought, shouted, tried to break free but couldn't. Then he saw the flashing lights of police cars entering the parking lot, and he heard Mrs. Helen's voice calling his name. Thomas, where are you? Here, he shouted with all his strength. The men holding him looked at William, waiting for instructions. William glanced at the approaching police cars and made a decision. Let him go. We're leaving. What about George and Joseph? Leave them. We're out of time. Thomas was released and fell to the ground. He watched William and the two men run to a dark car and speed off in the opposite direction of the police. Mrs. Helen came running, followed by 3 officers. Thomas, are you all right? I am, but William got away and I don't know where George and Joseph are. One of the officers stepped forward. Mr. Johnson, did you see which way they went? Thomas pointed. That way, a dark car. 3 men. We'll pursue them. Do you know where the hostages might be? William said they're in a warehouse somewhere, but he didn't say where. The officer radioed in, organizing the pursuit of William and the search for George and Joseph. Thomas sat on the ground, still processing everything that had happened. Mrs. Helen, how did you know I was in danger? Because I know you, Thomas. I knew you wouldn't resist trying to save George and Joseph on your own. What? If you hadn't arrived in time? We did, that's what matters. 2 hours later, the police caught William and his 2 accomplices on a road leading out of town, and during a search of his car, they found a GPS with the address of the warehouse where George and Joseph were being held. Thomas was at the station when George and Joseph were brought in. They were visibly shaken but alive and without serious injuries. Thomas, George said, hugging him, thank you for not giving up on us. George, I'm sorry I put you in danger. You didn't put anyone in danger. You gave us a chance to do the right thing. Joseph stepped forward too. Thomas, in that warehouse, George and I talked a lot about all this, and we came to a conclusion. What conclusion? That even knowing the risks, we'd do it all again. Because it's better to take a risk doing what's right than to live safely pretending not to see what's wrong. Thomas felt his eyes grow damp. At that moment, he realized the investigation had changed not only the company but all the people involved. In the following weeks, the situation gradually resolved itself. William was convicted of corruption, racketeering, and kidnapping. Richard Jr., cooperating from prison, helped map out all the schemes and identify all the politicians involved. Pinnacle Construction sold most of its assets to fund the corrections for the public works. Mrs. Helen Bennett used her personal savings to cover the remaining amount. Thomas was promoted to Director of Ethics and Compliance, another position created especially for him. Emily returned to college, but continued working part-time at the company. Northside Hospital was completely restructured and reopened with exemplary safety standards. Hope Gardens Municipal Daycare was demolished and rebuilt with proper materials. 6 months after the first press conference, Thomas was once again in a packed auditorium, but this time the mood was celebratory. Ladies and gentlemen, Mrs. Helen Bennett said into the microphone, today we are here to announce the completion of all corrections for the public works affected by the corruption schemes. Applause echoed through the auditorium. $63 million were invested in correcting 56 constructions. Hospitals, schools, daycares, health clinics, and police stations were completely restructured. More applause followed. But the most important thing isn't the numbers. The most important thing is that no lives were lost because of our mistakes, and that a situation like this will never happen again in this company. Mrs. Bennett paused and looked at Thomas. And none of this would have been possible without the courage of one man who decided to do the right thing, even knowing the risks he was taking. She called Thomas to the stage. He stood up, embarrassed, still unaccustomed to public attention. Mr. Thomas Johnson, on behalf of Pinnacle Construction, the New York City community, and all the people who will benefit from the corrections made, I would like to thank you for your courage and determination. The applause was deafening. Thomas looked around the auditorium and saw familiar faces. company employees, doctors from the corrected hospitals, teachers from the restructured schools, parents of children who attended the renovated daycares. He also saw Emily, George, Joseph, Mrs. Dorothy, old John the gatekeeper, so many people who had helped with the investigation and the corrections. When the applause died down, Thomas stepped up to the microphone. "I want to say something to everyone here." His voice still trembled, slightly, but it was firm. "I'm not a hero, I'm just a gardener who was lucky enough to find some papers in the trash. The real hero is Mrs. Helen Bennett, who chose the truth over protecting her own son." He looked at her, visibly moved. "The real heroes are George and Joseph, who risked their lives to help with the investigation. It's Emily, my daughter, who put college on hold to help people she didn't even know." Thomas paused, searching for the right words. "But if anything we've done can teach a lesson, it's that everyone can make a difference. It doesn't matter if you're a CEO, or a gardener, a doctor, or a janitor. What matters is having the courage to do the right thing." Thomas looked at the audience and continued, "And I want to say something special to the people who work in companies, any company. If you see something wrong happening, don't stay silent. It might be dangerous to speak up. It might be hard. But it's always the right thing to do." The applause started again, louder than before. When Thomas stepped off the stage, he was surrounded by journalists, employees, and members of the community. But what moved him the most was a little girl, about 8 years old, who approached him timidly. "Mr. Thomas," she said, "my mother told me you helped fix my school." "I did. Which school do you go to?" "New District Public School. Now the classrooms have air conditioning and the bathroom doesn't smell bad anymore." Thomas crouched down to the little girl's height. "And do you like your school now?" "I do. And my teacher said the school is safe now and will never collapse." Thomas felt a deep emotion. It was for children like her that all the struggle had been worth it. "What's your name?" "Jessica." "Jessica, study hard and be an honest person, okay? I will. When I grow up, I want to be just like you and help people." When the girl walked away, Thomas had to discreetly wipe his eyes. Emily approached him. "Dad, are you crying?" "I am, but they're happy tears." "Why?" "Because I finally understand why we did all this. It was for children like Jessica, so they can grow up in safe places and become better people." Then we were. Mrs. Helen joined them. "Thomas, can I speak with you privately?" They stepped away from the bustle of the auditorium, and Mrs. Helen's expression turned serious. "Thomas, I need to tell you something I found out today." "What is it?" "The Attorney General's investigation uncovered that the schemes were even bigger than we imagined." Thomas's stomach tightened. He thought everything had been resolved. "Bigger how?" "William wasn't working alone. He was part of a corruption network involving several construction companies in the city." "How many companies?" "At least 12, all using the same methods: substandard materials, overbilling, bribes." "To politicians." Thomas realized the problem was far larger than they'd thought. "What does this mean for us?" "It means we'll be called to testify in at least 20 different cases, and our company will be used as an example of how other businesses should act when they uncover wrongdoing." "Is that good or bad?" "Good for society. For us, it means the next 2 years will be tied up in legal proceedings." Thomas sighed. He'd thought the worst was over. "Mrs. Helen, do you regret starting all this?" "Never, and you?" "I don't either. But I admit sometimes I wonder what it would have been like if I'd pretended not to see those documents." "What would it have been like?" "Easier, but I wouldn't have been able to look in the mirror every morning." Mrs. Helen smiled. "That's exactly why you're the right person for this job." 2 weeks later, Thomas sat in a room at the Attorney General's office, giving testimony about everything he'd uncovered. It was his 5th deposition in 10 days. "Mr. Thomas," the prosecutor asked, "are you certain there were no prior suspicions of irregularities in the company?" "I'm certain. If there had been, I would have known. I've worked there for 23 years. "And what motivated you to investigate the documents you found?" "Instinct. The numbers didn't add up, and I've always been good with math." "Even with only an elementary education?" Thomas felt slightly offended by the question, but kept his composure. "Counselor, you don't need a college degree to know 2 + 2 is 4. The prosecutor smiled. "You're right. I apologize for the question." When he left the Attorney General's office, Thomas was met with a surprise in the parking lot. Richard Jr. was there, accompanied by a lawyer. "Thomas, can we talk?" Thomas hesitated. Richard Jr. had been released on bail, but still faced multiple charges. "What do you want?" "I want to thank you." "Thank me for what?" "For stopping me from destroying more lives." Thomas studied Richard Jr.'s face. He seemed genuinely remorseful. "Are you all right?" "I'm paying for what I did. I lost most of my assets. My wife is filing for divorce. My children barely speak to me, but I'm fine." "How can you be fine?" "For the first time in years, I sleep with a clear conscience. I don't have to make up lies. I don't have to threaten anyone. I don't have to pretend to be someone I'm not." Thomas was surprised by Richard's sincerity. "And what will you do now?" "I'll serve whatever sentence is given. I'll pay every fine imposed, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for the harm I've done." "How?" "By giving talks on business ethics, showing other business owners where I went wrong and how they can avoid making the same mistakes." Thomas grew thoughtful. "Richard, can I ask you a personal question?" "Go ahead." "Have you really changed, or are you just trying to lessen your punishment?" Richard looked Thomas in the eye. "Thomas, if I were trying to lessen my punishment, I wouldn't have publicly confessed everything I did. I would have hired the best lawyers and tried to deny it all." "Then why confess?" "Because you showed me that the truth sets you free. It may destroy your finances, ruin your reputation, and push your family away, but it frees your soul." Thomas felt a pang of compassion for Richard. "Your children will forgive you one day." "Maybe, or maybe not. But at least they'll grow up knowing their father owned up to his mistakes and tried to make things right." "And your wife?" "My wife has already forgiven me, but she doesn't want to live with me anymore, and I understand. She didn't marry a criminal." Thomas didn't know what to say. It was hard to see someone he'd once considered an enemy show such genuine remorse. "Richard, do you want some advice?" "I do. Don't give up on your family. Keep showing them you've changed. Eventually, they'll believe you." "You think so?" "I do. If I, who had every reason to hate you, manage to forgive you, your family will too." Richard was moved. "Thomas, have you really forgiven me?" "I have. I haven't forgotten what you did, but I've forgiven you." "Why?" "Because holding on to anger only hurts the one holding it, not the one who deserves it." Richard extended his hand. "Thank you, Thomas, for everything." Thomas shook his hand. "Richard, if you truly want to make amends, there's one thing you can do." "What?" "Help me convince other companies to self-correct. If they see it's possible to survive by being honest, maybe they won't have to go through what our company did." "You'd let me help with that?" "I would. You know the business world better than I do. You can open doors I never could." Richard nodded eagerly. "I'll help. It'll be a way to start repaying my debt to society." 2 weeks later, Thomas was in an unusual meeting. In the room were him, Richard, Mrs. Helen Bennett, and representatives from 5 construction companies in the city. "Gentlemen," Mrs. Helen said, "we've called this meeting to share our experience and prevent other companies from going through what we did." One of the businessmen, a middle-aged man named Anthony Rivers, seemed skeptical. "Mrs. Helen, with all due respect, you nearly bankrupted your company by exposing the schemes. Why should we follow the same path?" It was Richard who answered. "Mr. Anthony, because the alternative is worse. If you don't self-correct, someone will find out eventually. And when they do, the damage will be far greater. How can you be sure? Because there's now a widespread investigation in the industry. The Attorney General's office is auditing all construction companies with public contracts." "All of them?" "All of them. And those with irregularities will face criminal charges. No chance for settlements, no possibility of cooperation." Thomas spoke up. "Gentlemen, we're not here to threaten anyone. We're offering a chance to fix problems before they become formally investigated crimes." "What kind of problems?" asked another businessman. "Substandard materials, overbilling, bribery, anything that compromises the quality of public works. And if we don't have those problems, then you have nothing to worry about, but if you do, it's better to admit it now and correct it than wait to be caught later. Anthony Rivers leaned forward. And what would the procedure be for checking if there are issues? Mrs. Helen Bennett opened a folder. A full internal audit, review of all public contracts from the last 5 years, verification of material quality, identification of any irregularities. How much would that cost? Far less than criminal lawsuits and forced corrections. And if we find irregularities, you fix them immediately and report them to the authorities. Show good faith and willingness to make amends. Thomas added, and most importantly, you ensure the public isn't harmed by faulty construction. Anthony grew thoughtful. And would you be willing to help us through this process? We would, replied Mrs. Helen. We've created a consultancy specializing in business ethics and correcting irregularities. A consultancy? Thomas oversees the technical side, Richard handles legal aspects, and I supervise the overall process. Thomas was surprised. This was the first he'd heard of a consultancy. Mrs. Helen, when did we decide to start a consultancy? This morning. I thought it would be a good way to use the experience we've gained. And would this consultancy charge fees? It would, but at symbolic rates. The goal isn't to make money. It's to prevent other families from going through what ours did. A third younger businessman named Paul Mitchell Jr. spoke up. I'm interested. I inherited my company from my father, and honestly, I don't know everything he did. I'd rather find out from you than the FBI. Do you suspect there might be problems? I do. Some numbers never made sense to me, but my father said that's just how the industry worked. Thomas related to Paul Jr.'s situation. Paul, can I ask you something? Did you always suspect something was wrong? Always, but I didn't know how to investigate without causing trouble for the company. And what changed now? Your example. If you survive by being honest, so can I. Richard turned to Paul Jr. Paul, can I give you some advice? The longer you wait to investigate, the more problems you'll find, and the harder they'll be to fix. Why? Because as long as you don't know, someone in your company keeps doing things wrong, and with each passing day, the damage grows. Paul Jr. nodded. When can we start? Thomas glanced at Mrs. Helen, who smiled. Next Monday. By the end of the meeting, 3 of the 5 companies had hired the consultancy. Thomas left impressed by how things were progressing. Mrs. Helen, do you really think we can change the entire industry? Not the entire industry, but some. Companies, yes. And every company that changes means thousands of people will have access to safe buildings. And Richard, do you really trust him now? I do. People can change when they face the consequences of their actions. Thomas had to admit, Richard seemed genuinely remorseful and eager to help. Will Emily be part of the consultancy too? If she wants, but first she needs to finish college. That's true, I can't jeopardize her future. Thomas, her future is already secure. She's learned more about business ethics these past few months than she would in years of college. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing, in the following months, the consulting firm Thomas Johnson and Associates, as it became known, audited 16 construction companies. Significant irregularities were found in 12 of them. Thomas found himself traveling to various cities in the state, always accompanied by Emily or Richard Jr., investigating corruption schemes and guiding corrections. In each company, the story repeated itself with variations. Business owners who had started honestly, but gradually became corrupt. Employees who knew about the problems but were too afraid to speak up. And compromised public constructions that needed fixing. But Thomas also discovered something unexpected. In many cases, the business owners themselves felt relieved to confess the problems and finally correct them. Thomas, Paul Mitchell Jr. said in one of the final reports, you have no idea how much weight lifted off my shoulders when I admitted the company's mistakes. How so? For years, I lived in fear of someone finding out. I couldn't sleep properly, couldn't look at my children without feeling ashamed. Now I can work with dignity. And the costs of the corrections? They were high. I had to sell some personal assets, but it was worth it. Why? Because now I know the schools I build won't collapse. The hospitals I deliver won't catch fire. The children who study in my buildings are safe. Thomas smiled. That was exactly what he had felt when the corrections began at Pinnacle Construction. Paul, would you change anything if you could go back in time? I'd change everything. I never would have accepted the schemes I inherited from my father. I would have investigated everything from day one. And now I sleep peacefully. And when my kids ask about my work, I can speak with pride. These conversations repeated in many companies. Thomas realized that many business owners were trapped in schemes they didn't know how to escape, and the consulting firm offered them a dignified way out. But not all cases were so smooth. At Alden Construction, Thomas faced direct resistance from the owner. "Mr. Johnson," said John Alden, a 60-year-old man with a tough reputation, "are you here to teach me how to run my company?" "No, I'm here to help identify potential problems before they become officially investigated crimes." "And who said my company has problems?" Thomas showed some spreadsheets Emily had prepared. "Mr. Alden, your company saved 40% on material costs for the municipal hospital. That's impossible without compromising quality." "It is possible. It's called efficiency. Efficiency doesn't cut cement costs in half." John Alden slammed his fist on the table. "Mr. Johnson, I've been building for 40 years. I don't need a gardener telling me how to do my job." Thomas remained calm. "Mr. Alden, I'm not here to fight. I'm here to help. But if you don't want help, that's fine." "I don't. And I want you out of my company." Thomas stood to leave but paused at the door. "Mr. Alden, may I ask you a question?" "Go ahead." "Do you have children?" "Yes, 2. And do they use public hospitals?" "No, they have health insurance." "What if they didn't?" John Alden hesitated before answering. "What difference does it make?" "The difference is that other people have children who use the hospitals you build, and they trust you to do honest work." "I do honest work." "With substandard cement?" John was silent for a moment. "Mr. Johnson, the market works this way. Either we cut costs, or we lose bids to those who do." "But it doesn't work that way anymore. The Attorney General's office is investigating every company." "So what?" "So what happens when they find the problems in your company? And they will find them. You won't have a chance to fix them beforehand. You'll be sued directly." John Alden sat down heavily. "Mr. Thomas, if I admit there are problems, I'll be sued too." "You will, but you'll have a chance to cooperate, to fix things, to show good faith. That counts for a lot when sentencing comes." "And if I don't admit it?" "You'll still be exposed, but then you'll be seen as uncooperative." John was lost in thought for several minutes. "What if I agree to the audit and you find a lot of problems? Then we help you fix them all, one at a time, with a plan, without bankrupting the company." "Did you do this with Pinnacle Construction?" "We did, and the company is running normally, just honestly now." John sighed. "All right, do the audit, but I want to be part of everything." "Of course, it's your company." 3 weeks later, the audit at Alden Construction revealed even worse problems than Thomas had imagined. It wasn't just subpar materials. Entire buildings needed to be torn down and rebuilt. "Mr. John," Thomas said, presenting the final report, "the situation is serious." "How serious?" 4 buildings need demolition, 2 schools and 2 health clinics." John paled. "Demolished. The foundations were built with such poor materials they can't support the weight. They could collapse at any moment. And the cost to fix them? $15 million. John leaned on the table. "I don't have $15 million. Then we'll have to find a way to get it." "How?" Thomas had learned from the Pinnacle Construction experience. "By selling assets, taking out loans, setting up a payment plan." "And if I still can't get all the money?" "Then we ask for help. We launch a public campaign, explain the situation, mobilize the community." "That will destroy my reputation." "Mr. John, your reputation is already destroyed. The question is whether you'll be remembered as someone who hid the problems or as someone who owned up and fixed them." John was silent for a long time. "What if the schools collapse before we can fix them?" "Then we evacuate immediately, transfer the kids to other schools temporarily." And if there aren't any other schools available? We set up temporary classrooms, rent spaces, do whatever's necessary to keep the children studying safely. John looked at Thomas with admiration. Mr. Thomas, how do you stay so calm in the face of such big problems? Because I've learned that running from problems only makes them worse. It's better to face them head on and fix them. And what if I can't fix everything? You can. Maybe not alone, but with help, you can. John nodded slowly. All right, we'll do whatever it takes. The following week, John Alden held a press conference much like Thomas and Mrs. Helen Bennett had done. He admitted all the problems, took full responsibility, and announced a correction plan. The media reaction was similar. Initial outrage, followed by respect for his courage in owning his mistakes. But John faced a problem Thomas hadn't. One of the politicians involved in the schemes tried to blackmail him into silence. Alden, Councilman Charles Bennett said in a recorded call, John had decided to record it on Thomas's advice. You're out of your mind exposing these schemes. This will hurt a lot of important people. Councilman, I can't pretend I don't know about the problems anymore. Yes, you can and you will. Or you'll face much worse problems than faulty buildings. What kind of problems? Problems with the IRS, problems with the FDA, problems with the fire department. Your company could be shut down for a dozen different reasons. Thomas, who was standing next to John during the call, signaled for him to keep recording. Councilman, are you threatening me? I'm not threatening. I'm warning you. There are a lot of powerful people who could be hurt if you talk too much. And if I refuse to stay silent, then you'll find out that messing with powerful people has consequences. John hung up the phone with trembling hands. Thomas, he was clearly threatening me. He was. But now we have the recording. That's more evidence against him. What if he follows through on the threats? Then we face it. You're not alone in this. What do you mean? The consulting firm has lawyers, contacts in the press, and support from other companies that went through the same situation. If they try to come after you, we'll make it public. John felt slightly more confident. What if they try something physical? Then we call the police and request protection. Thomas was learning that every corruption case uncovered triggered reactions from those involved, and the more powerful the people involved, the more dangerous the reactions. But he was also learning that the truth had its own strength. Every company that corrected itself inspired others to do the same. Every politician prosecuted discouraged others from continuing their schemes. 6 months after the first audit at Alden Construction, Thomas was back in an auditorium, this time for a book launch. Ladies and gentlemen, Mrs. Helen said, into the microphone. We are pleased to present the book From Trash to Truth, How a Gardener Changed a Company, written by Mr. Thomas Johnson. Thomas still couldn't believe he had written a book. The idea had come when journalists started reaching out to him to tell his story in detail. To be honest, Thomas said when he was called to the stage, I didn't write the book alone. Emily, my daughter, helped me organize my thoughts and write properly. He looked at Emily in the audience. And Richard Jr. also helped by sharing his side of the story, because it's important to show both perspectives, the one who uncovers the problem and the one who created it. Richard Jr. was in the audience, too, still facing legal proceedings, but now actively working at the consulting firm. But the most important thing, Thomas continued, isn't my story. It's the story of all the people who decided to do the right thing, even knowing the risks. Thomas spoke about George and Joseph, about Mrs. Dorothy, about all the employees who had cooperated with the investigation despite their fears. And above all, it's the story of the people who benefited from the corrections. Children who now study in safe schools, patients who receive care in proper hospitals, families who can trust public buildings. A journalist raised her hand. Mr. Johnson, what's the most important lesson you've learned from all this? Thomas thought about the question. That doing the right thing isn't easy, but it's always possible, and that when one person has the courage to start, others find the courage to follow. What advice would you give to someone who discovers corruption at work? Speak up. Even if you're afraid, even knowing the risks, speak up. Because staying silent makes you an accomplice. What if the person is afraid of losing their job? It's better to lose your job with dignity than to keep your job and lose your dignity. Thomas's answer drew spontaneous applause. When the launch event ended, Thomas was approached by a woman in her 50s who introduced herself as the director of a construction materials company. "Mr. Johnson, my name is Marina Thompson. I'd like to hire your consulting firm. Do you suspect there are problems in your company?" "I don't suspect, I'm certain. I inherited the company from my husband 2 years ago when he passed away. And since then, I've discovered things that shame me deeply." "What kind of things?" "Low-quality materials being sold as top grade, fake invoices, bribing inspectors." Thomas took an interest in the case. "And why do you want to investigate now?" "Because I can't sleep knowing I'm selling subpar materials for public constructions. I have 3 young grandchildren. How can I look them in the eye knowing I'm contributing to unsafe schools and hospitals?" "You do realize investigating could cost you dearly." "I know, but keeping things as they are could cost even more, for me and for many others." Thomas admired Marina's honesty. "When can we start?" "Tomorrow, if possible." Thomas smiled. Here was another person who had decided to do the right thing. Tomorrow works. 2 weeks later, Thomas was in Marina Thompson's office, reviewing documents that revealed a sophisticated scheme for selling adulterated materials. "Marina," he said, "the problem here is even worse than I thought." "How so?" "Your company isn't just selling inferior materials, it's selling dangerous ones." "Dangerous how?" Thomas showed her a technical report. "This cement has chemical additives that can cause cancer. This steel has impurities that make it brittle. This paint contains toxic components." Marina turned pale. "My God. How many people could have been exposed?" "We don't know, but we need to find out urgently." "How?" "By identifying every construction site where these materials were used and offering medical exams to all workers who came into contact with them." "And the cost of that?" "Probably over $20 million. Marina sank into her chair. "Thomas, I don't have 20 million. The company can barely cover its monthly bills." Thomas had faced similar problems in other cases. "Marina, we'll have to get creative. Sell whatever we can. Take out loans, partner with the government to share costs. And if we still can't raise the money, then we'll have to shut down the company and use the proceeds to compensate the victims." Marina began to cry. "Thomas, this company is all I have. It's the legacy my husband left for me and our children." Thomas felt compassion for her. "Marina, your husband left a poisoned legacy. It's not your fault, but now it's your responsibility to clean it up. What if I just pretend I never found out?" "Could you?" Marina thought about the question. "No, I couldn't. Not after learning I've been selling materials that can cause cancer." "Then you already know the right decision." Marina wiped her tears. "All right, we'll do whatever it takes, even if it means losing everything." "Marina, you may lose material things, but you'll gain something far more valuable." "What?" "The certainty that you did the right thing. And that's something no one can take from you." Marina Thompson's case became one of the most complex Thomas had ever handled. It wasn't just about fixing buildings. It was about compensating people who might have developed illnesses from toxic materials. The investigation revealed at least 50 constructions had used contaminated materials, and around 300 workers had been exposed to carcinogens. "Thomas," Marina said in one meeting, "how will we find all those workers?" "Through unions, construction records, local hospitals, we'll conduct an active search." "What if some are already sick?" "Then we'll cover all treatment costs." "Thomas, this could bankrupt the company completely." "It could, but it's the price of decades of irresponsibility." Marina nodded sadly. "Sometimes I wonder what my husband would say if he knew all this." "What do you think he'd say?" "I think he'd be ashamed. He always took pride in being a respected businessman. And now you're giving him the chance to be truly respected." "How so?" "By fixing the mistakes he made, taking responsibility for what he didn't, showing that the Thompson family has integrity." Rachel smiled for the first time in weeks. "You're right. That's what I'll tell my children, that were clearing the family name. The investigation into Rachel's company revealed something that alarmed Thomas. The toxic materials weren't produced by her company. They were purchased from a supplier who knowingly sold adulterated products to multiple companies. "Rachel," said Thomas, "your company was a victim just as much as the constructions that used those materials." "How so?" "This supplier is selling toxic materials to several companies. You were deceived too. Does that change anything?" "It means we won't just sue your company. We'll sue the supplier too, and we'll investigate all the other companies that bought from him." "How many companies are there?" Thomas checked a list Emily had prepared. "At least 20, in 3 different states." Rachel realized the scale of the problem. "Thomas, does this mean the issue is nationwide?" "It does, and that our investigation may have uncovered a much bigger scheme than we imagined." Thomas immediately called Mrs. Helen. "Ma'am, we've discovered something very serious. The toxic materials supplier serves companies in multiple states." "Is this a federal issue?" "Yes. We'll have to involve the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Federal Prosecutor's Office." "Thomas, do you realize this will bring much more visibility to our work?" "I do. And I also realize we can't ignore a problem of this magnitude." "You're right. We'll notify the federal authorities immediately." A week later, Thomas was in Washington, D.C., giving testimony to the Federal Bureau of Investigation about the toxic materials scheme. "Mr. Johnson," asked the federal agent, "how did you uncover this scheme?" "By chance. I was auditing a company and found reports showing contamination in the materials." "And you're certain other companies are involved?" "I am. The supplier has contracts with companies in at least 5 states." "And do all these companies know the materials are toxic?" "Some do, others don't, but they're all responsible for the damage caused." "What's the estimated number of people affected?" Thomas checked his notes. "At least 5,000 workers exposed, and roughly 100,000 people who use the buildings made with these materials." The agent was stunned. "Mr. Johnson, this could be the largest case of construction-related contamination in the country's history." "It's possible, and that's why we need to act fast." "What do you recommend?" "Identify all affected constructions, offer medical exams to everyone exposed, and force all involved companies to cover the costs of correction and treatment. And if the OTA companies don't have the resources, then the government will have to cover the costs and later charge the companies." Thomas returned from Washington, D.C., with the feeling he'd gotten involved in something far bigger than he imagined when he first found those documents in the trash. Emily was waiting for him at the airport. "Dad, how did it go?" "Complicated. The Federal Bureau of Investigation is launching a nationwide investigation." "Is that good?" "It's good for the victims. For us, it means more work and more responsibility." "Are you scared?" "Not scared, but worried. With every investigation, we uncover bigger problems." "And does that bother you?" Thomas thought about the question as they drove home. "It doesn't bother me to uncover the problems. It bothers me to know they've existed for so long with no one doing anything. But now something's being done." "It is. And I hope it's not too late." In the following months, Operation Clean Materials, as it was named by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, became one of the largest corruption investigations in the country. Thomas found himself constantly traveling, auditing companies, giving statements, and guiding corrections. The consulting firm grew and now employed 20 people, including engineers, lawyers, auditors, and safety technicians. But what impressed him most was the number of business owners who sought out the firm voluntarily. "Thomas," Mrs. Helen Bennett said in a meeting, "last month, 15 companies came to us on their own." "Why?" "Because they'd rather be investigated by us than by the FBI." "And is that really better?" "Much better. When we investigate first, we can guide corrections before problems turn into formal crimes." Thomas felt proud of the work they were doing, but also overwhelmed by the responsibility. "Mrs. Helen, sometimes I think we're taking on responsibilities that aren't ours." "How so?" "We're practically regulating an entire sector of the economy. Shouldn't that be the government's job?" "It should, but the government wasn't doing it. Someone had to. And what if we make mistakes, if we guide a company the wrong way? Then we own up to our mistakes and fix them, just like we do with others' mistakes. Thomas admitted she was right. They weren't perfect, but they were trying to do the right thing. A year and a half after starting the firm, Thomas received an unexpected invitation. The Department of Urban Development wanted to hire them to audit all construction companies with federal contracts. Thomas, the secretary said in a meeting in Washington, D.C., "Your work has shown that self-regulation in the sector is possible. We want to expand this nationwide." Secretary, that would be a massive project. It would. Over 200 companies across the country. Thomas did the math in his head. It would take us at least 3 years to audit them all. We have 3 years. The goal is to have all federal contractors audited and certified by the end of this administration. And the budget? $50 million. Thomas nearly choked on the number. "Sir, our firm has never managed a project of this scale. But you have the experience and credibility needed, and most importantly, you have the public's trust." Thomas was tempted, but also intimidated. "May I consult my team before responding?" "Of course, but I need an answer in 2 weeks." Thomas returned to New York City with his mind racing. It was a unique opportunity to expand their work nationwide, but also an enormous responsibility. "Dad," Emily said when he told her about the proposal, "are you afraid you won't succeed?" "I am, but I'm also afraid of succeeding." "How so?" "If we succeed, we'll have to take on massive responsibilities. If we fail, we'll disappoint a lot of people. And if we don't try? If we don't try, we'll never know if we could have made a difference on a national scale." Emily smiled. "Dad, you taught me it's always better to try and fail than never to try at all." "I did, didn't I? So what's the hesitation?" Thomas laughed. His daughter was using his own lessons against him. "No hesitation. We'll accept." The meeting with the entire consulting team was emotional. "Everyone," Thomas said, "we have an offer from the federal government, but before deciding anything, I want to hear each of you." Richard Jr. was the first to speak. "Thomas, when you gave me a second chance, you said I could help fix the mistakes I made. This project is the chance to fix mistakes on a national scale." George, who now worked as an auditor at the firm, spoke up. "Thomas, 2 years ago, I was trapped for trying to do the right thing." Note: the translation strictly follows the provided cultural mappings, maintains the original structure, and adapts the tone for clarity and natural flow while preserving all plot elements. "Today, I'm here helping others do the right thing. If we can expand this to the entire country, we have to try." Joseph, who had also joined the team, agreed. "We started by investigating one company. Today we've investigated over 50. Why not 200? Mrs. Helen was the last to speak. "Thomas, when you walked into my office 2 years ago with those documents, I thought I was about to lose everything. Now I realize it was when I started gaining everything that truly matters: dignity, respect, and the certainty of making a difference." Thomas looked at all the people who had joined him on this journey. "So are we decided?" Everyone nodded. "Let's take on the federal project." 2 weeks later, Thomas was back in Washington, D.C., signing the contract that would make Thomas Johnson and Associates responsible for the largest corporate ethics audit in the nation's history. "Mr. Johnson," the secretary said after the signing, "do you understand the responsibility you're taking on?" "I do, and I'm prepared for it." "How can you be so sure?" Thomas thought about the question. "Secretary, 2 years ago I was just a gardener who found some papers in the trash. If I've made it this far, it's because every challenge prepared us for the next one. And what if this challenge is too big? Then we'll grow to meet it. That's what we do. We grow to serve the people who trust us." The secretary smiled. "Mr. Johnson, this country needs more people like you." "Secretary, this country has plenty of people like me. They just need a chance to show what they can do." 3 years later, Thomas stood in a Washington, D.C. auditorium to present the final report of the National Construction Audit. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said into the microphone, "for 3 years our team audited 203 construction companies across the country. The auditorium was packed with business leaders, politicians, journalists, and civil society representatives. We found irregularities in 142 companies. We identified 308 politicians involved in corruption schemes. We uncovered over 2,000 public constructions that needed corrections. And what was the total cost of those corrections? A journalist asked. $800 million. Gasps of surprise echoed through the room. But we also identified savings of over $2 billion in future contracts by eliminating overbilling. And how many people benefited? Thomas checked his notes. Directly, about 5 million people who used the corrected constructions. Indirectly, the entire American population who can now trust the quality of public works more. A businesswoman raised her hand. Mr. Johnson, what was the biggest challenge of the project? Convincing business owners that doing the right thing was better for business than sticking to corruption schemes. And did you succeed? In most cases, yes. We found many were trapped in schemes they didn't know how to escape. We offered them a dignified way out, and those who weren't convinced, they faced criminal charges, but they were the minority. A politician spoke up. Mr. Johnson, don't you think this project hurt the competitiveness of American companies? Thomas looked firmly at the politician. Congressman, a company that's only competitive by cheating isn't competitive, it's criminal. Applause filled the auditorium, and the companies that fixed their problems discovered that honesty can be more profitable in the long run than dishonesty in the short term. How so? Honest companies get better financing, win more international bids, attract better employees. Honesty is good for business. At the end of the presentation, Thomas was surrounded by journalists, but the question that struck him the most came from a college student. Professor Thomas, she said. Thomas had become an honorary professor at several universities. What advice would you give to young people who want to make a difference? Thomas thought about the question. Don't wait to be in the perfect position to start making a difference. Start where you are, with what you have, doing what you can, even if it's dangerous, especially if it's dangerous. The most important things in life always involve some risk. And what if we make mistakes? Make them. Making mistakes while trying to do the right thing is far better than doing the wrong thing perfectly. The student smiled. Thank you, Professor. You've inspired me. Thomas felt a deep emotion. Inspiring young people to make a difference was perhaps the most important outcome of all his work. 5 years after finding the first documents in the trash, Thomas was at home, in the garden he had created in the backyard. At 57, he had finally returned to tending plants, but now as a hobby, not a profession. Emily arrived for Sunday. Lunch, bringing her boyfriend. Dad, I'd like you to meet Paul. He works at a construction company in Boston. Thomas greeted the young man, a 25-year-old who seemed nervous. Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Thomas. I'm a big fan of your work. Thank you, Paul. And your construction company? Everything going well there? Paul smiled. Yes. In fact, we had an audit from your consulting firm last year. No issues were found. Good. That's how it should be. Mr. Thomas, can I ask you a personal question? Of course. Do you regret anything you've done over the past few years? Thomas thought about the question as he watered his rose bushes. I regret not starting sooner. What do you mean? For 23 years, I saw strange things at the company and said nothing. If I'd spoken up earlier, maybe fewer people would have been harmed. But you were afraid. I was. But fear isn't an excuse to stay silent in the face of injustice. Paul nodded. And what was the greatest reward from all of this? Thomas looked at Emily, who was helping his mother, now living with them, prepare lunch. The greatest reward was knowing I can look in the mirror every day without shame. And that my daughter can speak of her father with pride. And the consulting firm, will it continue? Yes, now it's run by Emily and Richard Jr. I just oversee things. And you, what do you do now? Thomas smiled. Now I give lectures on ethics to college students. I write books on social responsibility. And I tend my garden. And are you happy? Very happy. For the first time in my life, I feel my existence has made a difference in the world. That night, after everyone had left, Thomas sat in the garden with Emily. Dad, are you really happy? I am, sweetheart. Why? Because sometimes I think about what would have happened if you hadn't found those documents. I think about that too. I'd probably still be watering the company's plants. You'd be working at some office and thousands of people would still be using unsafe buildings. And we wouldn't be involved in any of this. No, we wouldn't. But we also wouldn't have helped so many people. Emily grew thoughtful. Dad, do you think it was worth it? All the stress, all the danger, all the difficulties? Thomas looked up at the starry sky. Emily, when I die, I won't take money, fame, or property with me. But I'll take the certainty that I made a difference in the lives of thousands of people, and that's priceless. But what if it had all gone wrong? What if we'd lost everything and hadn't helped anyone? It still would have been worth trying. Why? Because trying to do the right thing and failing is infinitely better than not trying at all out of fear of failure. Emily hugged her. Father, I love you, Dad, and I'm so proud of you. I love you too, sweetheart, and I'm proud to have raised someone who chose to make a difference alongside me. Dad, can I ask you one last question? Of course. If you could send a message to all the people who are afraid to do the right thing, what would you say? Thomas thought for a moment. I'd say courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing the right thing despite the fear. And when you do what's right, the universe conspires to help you. What if the universe doesn't help? Then at least you'll sleep peacefully knowing you did your part. Emily smiled. That's a good life philosophy. It's the only life philosophy that lets me look in the mirror without shame. 2 weeks later, Thomas was at a university in Portland, giving a lecture to engineering students about professional ethics. Students, he said, you'll graduate and work in companies where you might face situations like the one I did. The question is, what will you do? A student raised his hand. Professor, but what if we get fired for speaking up? Then you'll look for another job, but you'll do it with your dignity intact. What if we can't find another job? Then you'll create your own job, start an ethical business and prove that honesty can lead to success. A female student spoke up. Professor, do you really believe it's always possible to do the right thing? I do. It may not be easy, it may not pay off right away, it might even be dangerous, but it's always possible. What if everyone around us is doing the wrong thing? Then you'll be the first to do what's right, and others will follow your example. How can you be so sure? Thomas smiled. Because that's exactly what happened to me. I started alone and now there are hundreds doing the same across the country. After the lecture, a student approached Thomas. Professor, could I have your autograph? Of course, what's your name? Jessica Thompson. Thomas's eyes widened. Jessica, the same Jessica from New District Public School. Yes, you remember me. Of course I do. Look how you've grown. Jessica smiled. I'm in my 3rd year of civil engineering. I want to work on building schools and hospitals. Why? Because you showed me that building isn't just about walls. It's about shaping people's futures. Thomas felt his eyes well up. Jessica, you make me so proud. Professor, can I tell you a secret? Go ahead. When I was little and you fixed my school, I decided I wanted to be just like you when I grew up. And are you? I'm trying. I want to work only on projects that help society. Thomas hugged the young woman. Jessica, you're already far better than me. You're choosing to do right from the start of your career. It took me 50 years to find that courage. But you inspired me. Without your example, I might never have realized I wanted to make a difference. When Thomas got home that night, he told Emily about meeting Jessica. Dad, do you realize what this means? What? Your work will continue even after you can't work anymore. You've inspired a new generation. Thomas smiled. That's the greatest reward I could ask for. Why? Because it means we did more than fix past mistakes. We helped build solutions for the future. 6 months later, Thomas received a special invitation. The UN wanted him to speak at a global conference on business ethics. Thomas, said Mrs. Helen Bennett, do you understand how important this invitation is? I do, but I'm also afraid I might not be up to it. What do you mean? Helen, I'm still just a gardener who found some papers in the trash. What could I possibly teach business people from around the world? You can teach them that doing the right thing is always possible, and that an ordinary person can change the world. Thomas Johnson grew thoughtful. Do you think I should accept? I think you should. Your story could inspire change in other countries. Thomas accepted the invitation. 3 months later, he stood in an auditorium in New York City, facing 500 people from 50 different countries. Ladies and gentlemen, he began in basic English, my name is Thomas Johnson. 6 years ago, I was a gardener who found some papers in the trash. Today, I'm here to tell you that ordinary people can do extraordinary things. He told his story in simple English, with the help of a translator for the more complex details. He spoke about discovering the documents, his decision to investigate, the risks he faced, and the corrections that followed. The most important lesson I learned, he concluded, is that doing the right thing is not easy, but it's always possible. And when one person has the courage to start, other people have the courage to follow. The audience rose in applause. Thomas was surrounded by business people from various countries, all eager to learn more about implementing ethical audits in their companies. Mr. Johnson, asked a German businessman, would you consider consulting for companies in Europe? I don't speak German or French, Thomas replied, but I speak the universal language of honesty. The businessman smiled. That's all we need. Thomas returned home with job offers from 12 countries, but he decided it was time to pass the torch to younger people. Emily, he said, it's your turn to take over the international consulting. Dad, I don't have your experience. You have something better. You have academic training and grew up seeing how to do the right thing. It's the perfect combination. And what about you? What will you do? I'll keep giving talks, writing books, and tending to my garden. And I'll always be here whenever you need me. A year later, Thomas was in his garden when he received a call from Emily. Dad, I have some news. What news? I've just been invited to be a permanent consultant for the UN on business ethics. Thomas was speechless. Dad, are you there? I'm here just processing the information. Are you proud? I'm very proud. You've reached places I never imagined reaching. I only got here because you showed me the way. No, Emily, you got here because you chose to follow the path and because you're far more capable than I am. Dad, there's one condition for me accepting the position. What condition? That you be my permanent advisor. The UN wants to hire both of us. Thomas was moved. Emily, I'm almost 60. Do I still have the energy to work for the UN? Dad, you have the energy to change the world. That's more than enough. Thomas accepted. At 59, he became a special advisor to the UN on business ethics, traveling the world to implement transparency and honesty programs. 2 years later, Thomas was back in New York City for the launch of his autobiography. The book From Gardener to the World, How I Changed My Life by Doing the Right Thing, had become an international bestseller. Thomas, a journalist asked, during the launch event, what was the hardest moment of your entire journey? Thomas considered the question. It was when I found out George and Joseph had been kidnapped because of me. At that moment, I thought my decision to investigate had put innocent people in danger. And what made you keep going? The certainty that stopping would be even more dangerous, for them and for everyone else who could be harmed if the schemes continued. And what was the most rewarding moment? It was meeting Jessica at the university and discovering she had chosen her career because of the example we set. At that moment, I understood our work had inspired a new generation. And if you had to give advice to someone facing an ethical dilemma? Thomas looked at the packed audience. Do the right thing. Even if you're scared, even if you know the risks, do the right thing. Because at the end of your life, what matters isn't what you gained, but what you did for others. After the book launch, Thomas was approached by a young man around 25. Mr. Johnson, my name is Gabriel. I work at an auditing firm and uncovered serious irregularities. Thomas was immediately intrigued. What kind of irregularities? Financial manipulation, tax evasion, inflated contracts? And what do you plan to do? I want to report it, but I'm afraid of losing my job and being blacklisted. Thomas looked into the young man's eyes and saw the same fear he had felt years ago. "Gabriel, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "If you don't report it, will you be able to sleep at night, knowing you could have prevented others from being harmed?" Gabriel thought about the question. "No, I wouldn't." "Then you already know the right decision. But what if everything goes wrong?" "Gabriel, 8 years ago, I was a 52-year-old gardener who found some papers in the trash. Today, I'm a UN advisor. If I got here by doing the right thing, so can you. Would you help me?" Thomas smiled. "Of course, that's what our consultancy is for." 2 weeks later, Thomas was investigating irregularities again, this time at an auditing firm. Gabriel had become another young professional who chose honesty over convenience. "Thomas," Emily said during one of their meetings, "do you realize you never stop?" "What do you mean?" "Every month someone new asks for help to do the right thing. You've started a movement." "I didn't start a movement. I just showed it's possible to do the right thing." And that became a movement. Today, people in 20 countries are using our methodology. Thomas felt proud but also responsible. "Emily, sometimes I wonder if we've really changed anything or just created the illusion of change." "Why the doubt?" "Because there's still so much corruption in the world, so many companies still doing the wrong thing. Dad, you can't change the whole world alone, but you can inspire others to change their corners of it." "And that's what we're doing?" "Exactly. Every person who chooses to do the right thing, because of your example, changes their part of the world." Thomas nodded. Emily was right. "And what's the next step?" "The next step is to keep doing what we do, helping people find the courage to do the right thing." 10 years after finding the first documents in the trash, Thomas was in his garden, celebrating his 65th birthday with family and friends. George and Joseph were there, now partners in the consultancy. Richard was there with his wife, who had returned to him after seeing his transformation. Mrs. Helen was there, 80 years old, and still active as chairwoman of the reformed Pinnacle Construction. Jessica was there, freshly graduated in engineering, about to start her first job at a hospital construction company. Gabriel was there, now the compliance director at the firm where he had reported the irregularities. "Thomas," Mrs. Helen said, raising a toast, 10 years ago you found some papers in the trash and changed our lives forever." "Actually," Thomas replied, "you all changed my life. I just did what any decent person would do." "No, Dad," Emily said. "You did what any decent person should do, but most don't have the courage to do." "And what was the result?" Richard. Bennett Jr. spoke up. "The result was that hundreds of buildings were corrected, thousands of people became safer, and dozens of companies learned it's possible to be both honest and profitable at the same time." George Miller added, "And the result was that a new generation of professionals grew up knowing that doing the right thing is always the best choice." Joseph Thompson chimed in, "And the result was that today there's a global movement for corporate transparency that started in a garden in New York City." Jessica stood up. "And the result was that people like me discovered we can choose to make a difference from the very start of our careers." Gabriel concluded, "And the result was that young professionals like me learned that reporting wrongdoing isn't betrayal, it's patriotism." Thomas Johnson looked around at all those people and felt deep emotion. "Do you know what the real result of all this was?" "What?" they nearly all asked at once. "The real result was discovering that an ordinary person, by doing the right thing, can inspire other ordinary people to do the right thing too. And when that happens, the world gets a little better." Mrs. Helen Bennett raised her glass again. "Then let's toast to Thomas, who showed us that heroes aren't born with superpowers. They're born with conscience." Everyone raised their glasses. Thomas looked around the table and saw faces representing different phases of his journey, people who had chosen honesty even when it was hard. "Everyone," he said, "may I give one last speech?" "Go ahead," they all replied. Thomas stood and looked at each person present. "For 65 years I lived thinking I was just an ordinary gardener. But you taught me there's no such thing as an ordinary person when it comes to making a difference." He paused, moved. "You taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing the right thing in spite of fear. And when one person has the courage to start, others find the courage to follow. You taught me that honesty isn't just a moral virtue. It's a life strategy. Because when you're honest, you can sleep peacefully, look in the mirror without shame, and raise children who are proud of you. He glanced especially at Emily. And most of all, you taught me that every one of us has the power to change the world. Maybe not the whole world, but our corner of it. And that's more than enough. Applause echoed through the garden. That's why I want to challenge everyone here, Thomas continued. Those of you who've already chosen to do the right thing, inspire others to do the same. Multiply what we've learned. Let our story become the story of millions. And how do we do that? Jessica asked. By doing what we've always done, one person at a time, one company at a time, one ethical decision at a time. Gabriel raised his hand. Thomas, what if we face resistance? Then persist. Resistance is proof you're on the right path. Richard asked, what if people don't believe change is possible? Then show them by example, like you showed me. George wondered, what if the problems are too big to solve? Then solve them one piece at a time, like we did with the buildings. Joseph inquired, what if we don't have enough resources? Then find people who want to help. There are always people willing to support what's right, Mrs. Helen asked. The final question. Thomas, what if we fail? Thomas smiled. Helen, we've already won, because we proved it's possible to be honest and survive, that it's possible to do the right thing and thrive, that it's possible to inspire positive change in the world. He looked around at everyone once more. And if you keep doing what you've been doing, we'll win even more, because every person you inspire will inspire others. And so gradually the world becomes more honest, more fair and safer for everyone. The celebration lasted late into the night. When everyone had left, Thomas was alone in the garden with Emily. Dad, how do you feel now, 10 years later? I feel fulfilled, not because I gained fame or money, but because I managed to make a difference in so many people's lives. And if you could go back in time, would you do it all again? I would. But I'd do it sooner. I wouldn't wait until I was 52 to find the courage to do the right thing. Why? Because every day you delay doing the right thing is one less day you have to make a difference. Emily hugged her father. I love you, Dad. And I'm so grateful you taught me that doing the right thing is always the best choice. I love you too, sweetheart. And I'm grateful you chose to continue the work we started. Dad, can I ask you one last question? Of course. What's your biggest dream now? Thomas looked up at the stars in the sky. My biggest dream is that one day, stories like ours won't be necessary anymore. That doing the right thing will be so natural that no one will need to be brave to do it. And until then? Until then, we keep inspiring people to do the right thing, one person at a time, one company at a time, one decision at a time. Thomas and Emily stood in silence for a few minutes, looking at the garden he had created. Dad, your plants are beautiful. They are. Taking care of them taught me something important. What? That growth takes time, that you have to water them a little every day. That results come gradually, but when they do, they last. Like our work? Exactly like our work. Real change takes time, requires constant care, and depends on many people doing their part every day. Emily smiled. That's a good metaphor. It's the only one that makes sense to me, because deep down I'm still a gardener. Only now, instead of tending plants, I tend to people's consciences. When Emily left, Thomas stayed alone in the garden. He looked at the rose bushes he had planted, the trees he had nurtured, all the greenery he had brought to life. He thought about everything that had happened over the past 10 years, the discovery of the documents, the decision to investigate, the risks taken, the victories won, the people inspired. He thought of George and Joseph, who had risked everything to help, of Richard Jr., who had found redemption, of Mrs. Helen, who had chosen truth over her own son, of Jessica, who had pursued an ethical career because of the example she had witnessed, of Gabriel, and so many other young people who had decided to do the right thing despite the risks. And most of all, he thought of Emily, who had chosen to dedicate her life to continuing the work they had begun. Thomas sat on a garden bench and reflected on his life. At 65, he was certain he had made a difference. Not a small one, in the lives of a few people, but a significant one in the lives of thousands. More importantly, he was certain that the difference would continue to be made even after he was gone, because he had inspired a new generation of people committed to honesty and justice. Thomas looked up at the starry sky and whispered a prayer of gratitude. Gratitude for finding those documents in the trash. Gratitude for having the courage to investigate. Gratitude for all the people who had chosen to help him. And above all, gratitude for discovering that an ordinary person, by doing the right thing, could change the world. He stood up from the bench, took one last look at the garden, and went inside. Tomorrow would be another day to make a difference. And he was ready. The end. Now tell us what you thought of the story and where you're watching from. If you have something to share with us, leave your honest thoughts in the comments. Do you think Thomas made the right decision by investigating the documents he found? We'd love to hear your opinion. Thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget to like the video and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other exciting stories.